The world is full of unanswered questions, puzzles that have haunted humanity for centuries. From the eerie silence of vanished civilizations to the unsolved riddles buried beneath ancient ruins, we are constantly reminded that there is much we don't know. What happened to the lost colony of Roanoke? Who, or what, built the pyramids with such precision? And why do some disappearances seem to defy logic itself? These aren't just stories. They are mysteries that call to us, urging us to seek the truth. So, sit back, relax, and let's uncover the secrets that time has hidden. In a quiet, climate-controlled room, tucked away in a secure vault, lies a book unlike any other. It's a manuscript, bound in delicate vellum, its pages yellowed with the passing centuries. The Voynich Manuscript, named after the Polish bookseller Wilfrid Voynich, who discovered it in 1912, has baffled historians, linguists, and cryptographers for over a century. There are no dates, no names, just the intricately written text and bizarre illustrations that seem to defy any logical explanation. At first glance, it appears to be a medical text, filled with botanical illustrations, astrological symbols, and even curious drawings of women bathing in strange, fluid-filled vats. But the script that adorns every page is entirely unknown, an alphabet never seen before, words that seem to have no connection to any known language, ancient or modern. This book, thought to have originated sometime in the early 15th century, is often referred to as the most mysterious manuscript in the world. What exactly is the Voynich Manuscript? How did it come to be? And why has no one been able to decipher its contents? Some have posited that it was created as an elaborate hoax, perhaps by a medieval prankster or a rogue scholar with too much time on their hands. Others have suggested that it could be the work of an unknown civilization, or even the remnants of a long-lost language, preserved and hidden away for reasons we may never fully understand. But the manuscript's true origins remain elusive. The earliest known history of the Voynich Manuscript traces it back to the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II in the late 16th century. Rudolf, known for his obsession with alchemy and the occult, believed the manuscript held the key to the mysteries of the universe. He commissioned an expert to decipher it, but even the brightest minds of the time could make no sense of its contents. In fact, the manuscript remained locked away in secret archives for centuries, only resurfacing in the modern age when Voynich came upon it in the early 20th century. What makes the manuscript even more perplexing is the fact that it appears to contain both ancient and fantastical knowledge. Some pages feature intricate drawings of plants, many of which bear no resemblance to any known species. Were these plants real, or are they symbolic, representing something far beyond the tangible world? And what of the curious depictions of women bathing in mysterious, otherworldly fluids? Some have speculated that they may be linked to alchemical processes or esoteric rites, but the meaning remains unclear. Linguists have tried for decades to crack the code of the manuscript's text. Early attempts suggested that it could be a cipher, a coded language meant to obscure the true meaning of its contents. Yet no key has been found that can unlock its mystery. More recent efforts have involved the use of sophisticated algorithms and artificial intelligence, but even these advanced methods have yielded no definitive answers. The manuscript script does not resemble any known linguistic structure, leading some to question whether it is even a language at all, or if it was designed solely to defy understanding. One theory, albeit speculative, posits that the manuscript could be a work of lost knowledge, a remnant of an ancient civilization that disappeared long before recorded history. Could it be that the book is not meant to be understood in our terms, but rather contains wisdom intended for a different time? Or perhaps it is a piece of knowledge meant to be unlocked only by the worthy, its meaning hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right person to unlock its mysteries. There are those who even entertain the idea that the manuscript's content might not be of this world. Could it be a work of extraterrestrial origin, conveying a message from beyond our own planet? After all, the strange symbols and imagery seem almost otherworldly, designed by an intelligence whose nature is beyond our comprehension. Despite these theories, the manuscript remains largely a mystery. Its cryptic language, strange imagery, and unyielding resistance to translation continue to captivate those who seek to uncover its meaning. As we search for answers, we are left with more questions. What could be hidden in its pages? Was it the work of a brilliant mind, a scholar, or an alchemist, whose knowledge was meant to be preserved for future generations? Or is it a work of fiction, a creation designed simply to perplex and deceive? One thing is certain: the Voynich Manuscript holds secrets, and those secrets, however cryptic, remain locked away, waiting for someone to unravel them, if they ever can. As we drift across the frozen waters of the North Atlantic, our gaze is drawn to the rugged, windswept coastlines of Greenland, an isolated landmass where history's most haunting mysteries have taken root. In this desolate, icy expanse, where the wind howls and the landscape is unforgiving, one of the greatest enigmas of the medieval world lies waiting to be unraveled: the disappearance of the Norse Greenland colonies. Imagine a time, over 1,000 years ago, when the world was not yet shaped by modern civilization, and yet, in the midst of this remote northern wilderness, a civilization was thriving. The Norse settlers, led by Eric the Red, established 2 thriving colonies on the southern coast of Greenland, the Eastern Settlement and the Western Settlement. These were places of hard labor and enduring spirit, where farmers, craftsmen, and merchants carved out a life from the harsh environment. By the year 1300, at their peak, these colonies were home to an estimated 2,000 to 3,000 people, living in communities marked by longhouses and the promise of survival in a world as difficult as it was expansive. And then, just as swiftly as they appeared, they were gone. By the 15th century, the Norse settlements had vanished from the historical record, leaving behind only ghostly remnants, ruins half buried in the ice and snow, skeletal remains in forgotten burial grounds, and vague, fragmented accounts from later explorers. The exact reasons behind their disappearance remain a subject of heated debate, and perhaps it is this very uncertainty that imbues the mystery with its unsettling allure. Mainstream explanations often point to environmental factors. Some scholars believe that the settlers, once accustomed to a relatively mild climate, faced a series of harsh winters during what we now call the Little Ice Age. The cooling temperatures may have crippled their ability to farm, forcing them into a struggle for survival against the unforgiving land. A dramatic drop in temperatures would have led to shorter growing seasons, making it increasingly difficult to sustain the population. Coupled with this, the Norse may have overexploited their environment, cutting down trees for fuel, which led to soil erosion, making it harder to cultivate crops. Yet, despite these plausible explanations, something feels missing. How could such a well-established society simply vanish without leaving any definitive trace of its end? The mystery deepens when one considers the archaeological evidence. While some remnants of settlements remain, with well-preserved artifacts and bones, no conclusive evidence has emerged to explain the settlers' abrupt departure. No major disasters, no signs of mass mortality, no unmistakable clues. Just silence. Then, there are the more speculative theories, ones that venture into the realm of the unknown. Some suggest that the Norse colonists may have fallen victim to violence or raiding from indigenous Inuit populations, who were already living in Greenland. Tensions may have escalated as resources grew scarcer, but there's little direct evidence to support these claims. Others wonder if the Norse simply abandoned the colonies to return to Iceland, or even ventured further into the unknown reaches of North America, where they may have encountered another world entirely, one far beyond the scope of their historical understanding. Could it be that the Norse simply gave up on the harsh land and sought refuge elsewhere? Or perhaps there's something far more enigmatic at play, a societal collapse driven by factors we can barely comprehend today. Could it have been a gradual, slow erosion of culture and community, unseen by the modern eye? There's one theory that seems almost too bizarre to consider, one that suggests the Norse settlers did not disappear at all. What if they adapted to the very land that seemed to repel them? Some suggest that the Greenland Norse may have integrated with the Inuit, their cultures merging over time until the distinct identity of the Norse people vanished into the broader tapestry of Greenland's population. Could there be more to the story than we know, hidden beneath centuries of ice and snow? The lack of clear answers leaves the disappearance of the Norse Greenland colonies lingering in the air like a shadow. Every new discovery only raises more questions, suggesting that perhaps the final chapter of this ancient mystery has yet to be written. What really happened to those resilient settlers who once called Greenland home? Did they simply fade into the frost? Or is there something we have yet to uncover, something waiting to be revealed beneath the surface of the land they once hoped to tame? In the cold silence of Greenland's desolate coast, the past remains elusive, and the answers, like the ice that covers the land, are slowly melting away, leaving only fragments of a story that refuses to be fully told. The Tower of London stands as one of the most iconic landmarks in British history, its grey stone walls rising against the backdrop of a city that has witnessed centuries of triumph, tragedy, and intrigue. Yet, within the shadow of this fortress, there lies a mystery that has haunted the annals of history for over 500 years: the disappearance of the princes in the tower. It is here, in the heart of the tower, that two young boys, Edward V and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York, were last seen alive. The year was 1483, and the brothers, mere children of 12 and 9, had been taken into the care of their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, after the untimely death of their father, King Edward IV. The throne of England was now vacant, and in the turmoil of political ambition, the young princes were held in the tower, where they were expected to await their coronation. Instead, they would vanish, leaving behind only whispers and theories. The last confirmed sighting of the two boys was in the summer of 1483. Witnesses reported that the princes were playing in the tower gardens, carefree, unaware of the dark fate that was soon to unfold. But by the autumn of that same year, the boys had disappeared. No cries for help, no letters or messages, no traces of their presence in the tower. They simply vanished. The official account, offered by Richard of Gloucester, who would go on to become King Richard III, was that the boys were last seen in the tower, and that they were presumed dead, though no body was ever found. The sudden disappearance of the princes could not have been more timely for Richard III, who, now seated on the throne, faced mounting opposition to his rule. Some have speculated that the young princes were eliminated to secure Richard's claim to the crown, removing any potential rivals who could lay claim to the throne. Yet, there are no definitive answers, only suspicions. The mystery is filled with gaps, and each theory only opens the door to new questions. Mainstream historians point to the possibility that the princes were murdered, perhaps smothered in their beds or disposed of in some other grim manner. But where, then, are the bodies? The tower, a place so carefully watched, so brimming with both history and modern exploration, has revealed no conclusive evidence to explain what happened to the two young boys. Theories surrounding their disappearance diverge even further. Some suggest that the boys may have been secretly hidden away, possibly in a far-flung part of the kingdom, where they could live in exile, safe from the dangers of courtly intrigue. Could they have been rescued, whisked away by loyalists who wanted to see them restored to the throne? There are even whispers that the boys may have lived out their lives in secret, the very identity of their killers, and those who sought to protect them, lost to the depths of time. And then there are the more fringe theories, ideas that push the boundaries of the known world, ideas that venture into the realm of the fantastical. Some have suggested that the princes were not murdered at all, but rather became victims of something far more strange. Could they have been taken by forces beyond the political? Could some ancient, esoteric secret, a hidden conspiracy, have played a role in their disappearance? These theories, though unsubstantiated, are impossible to dismiss entirely, as the mystery of the prince's disappearance remains so deeply intertwined with the power struggles of the time. Despite the centuries that have passed, the mystery of the princes in the tower remains unsolved. The bones of the two boys have never been conclusively found. There have been claims of skeletal remains discovered in the tower in the 1670s, but these too remain shrouded in doubt. Could the truth, still buried beneath centuries of history, eventually come to light? Or has it been carefully hidden, entangled in a web of deception and political maneuvering, for reasons we may never fully comprehend? For all the theories, for all the historical investigation, the disappearance of Edward V and Richard of York remains one of England's most enduring and unnerving mysteries. And as the tower's grey stone walls stand silent in the heart of London, the question lingers. What really happened to the two young princes who vanished so completely? And why has history, to this day, refused to give up its final answer? As we shift from the stone walls of the Tower of London, we find ourselves once again drawn into the world of medieval Europe, a world where religious fervor, innocence, and tragedy collided with unsettling force. The year is 1212, and somewhere in the heart of France, an extraordinary event begins to unfold, one that would forever haunt the pages of history: the Children's Crusade. Imagine, if you will, a vast, sun-drenched landscape stretching across the French countryside, dotted with humble villages and bustling towns. Here, among the fields and marketplaces, a curious and heartbreaking movement was born, one led not by the noble knights or seasoned warriors of the Crusades, but by children, thousands of them, boys and girls, some as young as 8 years old, gathered, drawn by a single, unrelenting hope: to reclaim the Holy Land, to free Palestine from the grip of the infidels, as it was understood by the Christian Church at the time. The Crusades were no stranger to violence and bloodshed, but this was something entirely different. An army of children, many of whom had no understanding of the brutality they would soon face. Accounts of the event vary, and the exact number of participants remains uncertain, but historians agree that the movement was both remarkable and tragic. It is said that the children believed the Mediterranean Sea would part before them, as it had for Moses in the ancient scriptures, allowing them to march unhindered to Jerusalem. Their faith was absolute, their mission clear. But what transpired after they set off toward the sea is a story that defies easy explanation. The children's journey began in France, where they were said to have been inspired by visions and sermons from local religious leaders. They gathered in the thousands, some reports claiming up to 30,000 children, though the figure is likely inflated. What is certain, however, is the unwavering conviction with which they embarked on their crusade. Their march would take them through the harsh terrain of Europe to the port towns of the Mediterranean, where they hoped to set sail for the Holy Land. But their journey quickly descended into chaos. What happened to the children on their fateful journey is a matter of historical debate, with the most widely accepted theory being that they never even reached their destination. Instead, many of the children were sold into slavery by unscrupulous merchants who took advantage of their naivety and desperation. Others were lost to disease, hunger, and the perils of a journey ill-prepared. Some sources suggest that the children were duped into boarding ships that were promised to carry them to Palestine, only to find themselves caught in the treacherous currents of the Mediterranean. What happened to those who set sail? Were they doomed to perish in the sea, or were they taken to distant lands, lost forever in the pages of history? But perhaps the most haunting part of the story is the enduring silence that surrounds the final fate of the children. Were they truly victims of their own faith, led to their deaths by the unchecked zeal of those who preached to them? Or was something more sinister at play, an orchestrated tragedy that exploited the innocence and desperation of youth? Some suggest that the Children's Crusade was less a religious movement than a political tool, a way for the church and rulers to manipulate the vulnerable. Were the children simply pawns in a much larger game? As we sift through the sparse records of the Crusade, we are left with more questions than answers. The historical accounts are vague, filled with contradictions, and the stories of those who survived, if any, have never fully come to light. Some say the children were victims of false promises. Others claim they were manipulated by forces beyond their understanding. Yet, the legacy of the Children's Crusade persists as one of the most tragic and mysterious episodes in the annals of history. Could the motivations of those who led these children have been more complex than we realize? Could there have been forces operating in the shadows, manipulating both the innocent and the powerful for their own ends? What, ultimately, did these children hope to achieve, and what price did they pay for their blind faith? The Children's Crusade remains a haunting enigma, a story of innocence lost and hope dashed. The tragic outcome of the Crusade invites us to ask, what was it that truly led these children to march toward their doom, and how much of their fate was sealed by the larger forces at work in the world around them? Like so many other mysteries from this era, the truth remains buried, lost, perhaps, in the shifting sands of time. And as we look back on this extraordinary event, we are left to wonder, what might still lie hidden beyond the reach of history's grasp? As we leave behind the troubled paths of medieval Europe, we journey further east to the dense jungles of Southeast Asia, where the whispers of a forgotten empire echo through the trees. Here, deep in the heart of Cambodia, lies the majestic city of Angkor, a once thriving metropolis that stood as the jewel of the Khmer Empire. Today, its magnificent temples rise out of the verdant greenery, their stone walls carved with intricate reliefs of gods and kings, their towering spires piercing the sky. Yet, despite the grandeur of this ancient city, there remains one haunting question that has baffled historians and archaeologists for centuries. What caused the collapse of Angkor? At its peak, during the 12th and 13th centuries, Angkor was home to over 1 million people. The city spanned over 1,000 square kilometers, with monumental temples like Angkor Wat standing as symbols of the empire's power and devotion. The Khmer people had mastered the art of engineering, building sophisticated water management systems that allowed the city to flourish in an otherwise challenging environment. The intricate canals, reservoirs, and irrigation systems were, in many ways, ahead of their time, transforming the land into a thriving agricultural hub. Yet, by the late 15th century, Angkor was abandoned. The grand city, once a bustling center of trade, culture, and religion, was left to the embrace of the jungle. The temples fell silent, the streets deserted. The mystery of why such a prosperous and advanced civilization would collapse so suddenly continues to puzzle scholars to this day. The most widely accepted theory points to environmental factors. Evidence suggests that a series of severe droughts, combined with the overuse of the region's water resources, led to the destabilization of Angkor's delicate ecosystem. The sophisticated water management systems that once sustained the city became increasingly ineffective as the climate changed. The people of Angkor, reliant on rice farming and irrigation, found themselves facing crop failures and dwindling resources. As the droughts intensified, so did the strain on the empire's infrastructure. Could the fall of Angkor have been a slow, inevitable process, as nature, once tamed by human hands, turned against those who had shaped it? Yet, there are other theories that suggest the collapse was not solely due to environmental factors. Some scholars propose that internal strife, political instability, and warfare played a significant role in the city's downfall. The Khmer Empire, at its zenith, was a vast and powerful force, but like many empires before and after it, it may have been weakened by corruption, factionalism, and the pressures of maintaining control over such a large territory. Perhaps, as the empire's power waned, its people began to turn on one another, further eroding the stability of the state. Adding to the complexity of this mystery is the possibility of external forces. Some have speculated that the rise of neighboring states, such as the Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya, could have contributed to Angkor's decline. Evidence suggests that the Thai sacked the city in the 15th century, but did this attack mark the final blow, or was it simply the tipping point in an already fragile empire? Still, despite the plausible explanations, the true cause of Angkor's collapse remains elusive. Could there have been other factors at play, factors lost to time and covered by the thick jungle growth that has long since reclaimed the city? Some even suggest that the collapse of Angkor was a result of something far more mysterious, a catastrophic event that remains hidden in the ruins, waiting to be discovered. Could the empire have fallen not simply due to climate, politics, or warfare, but to something beyond our understanding? The physical remnants of Angkor, with its awe-inspiring temples and intricate carvings, offer no easy answers. They stand as a silent reminder of the grandeur that once was, their stones etched with the story of a civilization that seemed untouchable, only to vanish into the shadows of history. But as the jungle slowly reclaims the city, one can't help but wonder, was Angkor's fall truly just the result of a series of misfortunes, or did something more profound cause its sudden and dramatic collapse? Even now, centuries after its abandonment, the mystery of Angkor continues to haunt the landscape, inviting speculation and intrigue. What was it that led to the end of such a remarkable civilization? And perhaps more tantalizing still, what secrets might still lie buried beneath the roots of the ancient trees, waiting for the right moment to be uncovered? As we continue our journey through history's most unsettling mysteries, we now turn to one of the most enduring and tantalizing riddles of the medieval world, the fate of the Knights Templar treasure. The Templars, once a powerful and secretive military order, were instrumental in the Crusades and played a pivotal role in the religious and political landscape of Europe during the 12th and 13th centuries. But as their influence grew, so too did the mysteries surrounding them. Chief among them the question, what happened to the vast fortune they accumulated? The Templars were known not just for their military prowess, but also for their vast wealth and land holdings. They controlled numerous castles, estates, and even banking systems across Europe and the Holy Land. The order was entrusted with the safekeeping of pilgrims' treasures and became incredibly rich as a result. But in the early 14th century, the order's fortunes took a dramatic turn. In 1307, King Philip IV of France, deeply indebted to the Templars and fearing their growing power, launched a sudden and brutal assault on the order. On Friday, October 13th, hundreds of Templar knights were arrested, tortured, and executed. Their grand properties and vast fortunes were seized, and the order was formally disbanded by Pope Clement V in 1312. But amid the chaos, one question emerged. Where did the Templars' treasure go? Historians agree that the Templars were wealthy beyond measure, but what became of that wealth after their fall is less certain. Some say the treasure was hidden away by the Templars themselves, their final act of defiance against their enemies. But where could they have hidden it? And why has it never been found? The search for the treasure has fueled speculation for centuries, with a number of theories emerging to explain its disappearance. Some believe that the Templars, knowing their order was doomed, took steps to conceal their vast riches. Some suggest that the treasure was hidden in plain sight, perhaps stored within the many Templar estates across Europe, or buried in secret locations, known only to a select few. Others point to the possibility that the treasure was shipped away, perhaps to the shores of the New World, where the Templars might have sought refuge and concealed their riches from the prying eyes of their enemies. One of the most enduring legends is that the treasure was hidden in the vaults of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, a place of great religious significance. The Templars had spent decades in the Holy Land, and it is believed that they may have discovered something of immense value during their time there. An artifact, perhaps, or an ancient relic that would explain their sudden rise to power. Some have suggested that this relic could have been the fabled Ark of the Covenant, though no evidence has ever surfaced to support this theory. Nevertheless, the idea that the Templars may have hidden such an object, along with their vast wealth, in the bowels of the Temple Mount has captivated generations of treasure hunters and historians alike. Another theory points to the Knights Templar's connection with the Freemasons. Some claim that the Templars' treasure was not just material wealth, but also sacred knowledge, perhaps of an esoteric or spiritual nature. Did the Templars possess secrets that they hid from the world? Could the treasure be a metaphor for something far more profound, something lost to time, but still holding the key to a mystery that has yet to be solved? The mystery only deepened when the search for the treasure turned toward the New World. Some speculate that the Templars fled to the Americas after their disbandment, carrying their treasure with them. Could the lost treasure have been buried beneath the earth, in secret locations throughout North America, perhaps even in places like Oak Island off the coast of Canada, where treasure hunters have been seeking hidden riches for centuries? The thought that the Templars may have established a secret society that carried their wealth across the Atlantic to the New World is a theory that continues to capture the imagination of many. But no matter how far or wide the search has spread, no definitive discovery has been made. The treasure has remained elusive, just as it has for centuries. The vaults, once filled with riches and sacred relics, now lie silent. Some of the Templars' former castles and strongholds, like the imposing Château de Gisors in France, remain sites of intense speculation, their shadowed corridors and hidden chambers still rumored to contain the long-lost riches of the order. Was the treasure hidden by the Templars in their final hours? Or did it disappear into the hands of those who sought to destroy them? Some have even questioned whether the treasure exists at all, suggesting that it may be nothing more than legend, created by the order itself to mask its true intentions and keep its secrets hidden. Despite the many theories, the truth remains just out of reach. The Knights Templar's treasure is one of the most enduring mysteries in history. It seems as though the more we learn, the more we are left with questions. What was the treasure truly composed of? Was it just gold and jewels? Or was there something more, something beyond material wealth? And if the treasure still exists, where might it be? For now, the fate of the Templar treasure remains unknown. Its story continues to captivate treasure hunters, historians, and mystery enthusiasts alike. As we look into the dark, forgotten corners of history, we are reminded that some mysteries, no matter how many years pass, refuse to be solved. The treasure of the Knights Templar may still be out there, hidden away, waiting for someone to finally uncover its secrets. As we delve deeper into the obscure corners of history's most perplexing mysteries, we come to a strange and unsettling tale from medieval England, a story that blurs the line between folklore and reality. It is the tale of the Green Children of Woolpit, an account that has baffled historians and sparked the imagination of those seeking to understand the inexplicable. In the small village of Woolpit, nestled in the rural heart of Suffolk, England, a peculiar event occurred sometime in the 12th century. It was here that two children, brother and sister, were discovered in a state of bewilderment. They appeared out of nowhere, emerging from a wolf pit, a deep, narrow trench used for trapping wolves, which gave the village its name. The children were unlike any the villagers had ever seen. Their skin was described as green, a striking and unnatural hue. They wore strange clothes, and they spoke in an unfamiliar language that no one could understand. At first, the villagers were understandably perplexed. The children seemed frightened, weak, and confused. They were taken in by a local landowner, Sir Richard de Calne, who provided them with food and shelter. However, the children's unusual appearance and behavior were only the beginning of a tale that would grow even stranger. The children reportedly refused to eat the food that was offered to them. Instead, they would only consume beans, an unusual preference that deepened the mystery surrounding their origins. Eventually, with time and care, the children began to adjust to life in Woolpit. The boy, however, fell ill and died not long after their arrival. The girl, on the other hand, survived, and as she grew, her skin lost its green tint, and she eventually learned to speak the local language. As the years passed, the girl, known only as Agnes in some accounts, recounted a story that would only add to the enigma. She explained that she and her brother had come from a place called St. Martin's Land, a mysterious realm that existed in perpetual twilight, where everything was green. According to Agnes, she and her brother had been tending to their father's flock when they were suddenly struck by a strange, overwhelming light. They then found themselves in the village of Woolpit, disoriented and alone. But the girl's tale was more than just an odd account. It was filled with details that left more questions than answers. What was this St. Martin's Land? Could it have been a place beyond the known world, or perhaps a different time from which these children had inexplicably appeared? Some have speculated that the children were from another dimension, while others suggest that they could have been displaced from a distant part of the world, or even from a faraway time. Theories about the green children's origins vary widely. One of the more popular explanations points to the idea that the children could have been from a neighboring village, possibly a family suffering from malnutrition or a medical condition that caused their skin to appear green. Some suggest that the children may have had a form of chlorosis, a condition caused by a lack of iron, which could result in a greenish tint to the skin. In this interpretation, the children's strange behavior and appearance were the result of a combination of illness and cultural misunderstanding. Yet, this explanation does little to account for the children's curious story of their homeland, the peculiar St. Martin's Land, and their sudden and unexplained appearance in Woolpit. If they had come from a nearby village, why would they have spoken a language no one could understand? And why, when they first arrived, did they only eat beans, a food they were clearly familiar with, despite being in a completely foreign environment? Some have suggested that the story could have been a fabrication, a piece of medieval folklore designed to intrigue or entertain. It's possible that the tale of the green children was exaggerated over time, with details added or distorted to make the story more compelling. But even if the tale were a fabrication, how do we explain the two children's strange appearance and the bizarre circumstances of their arrival in Woolpit? Could a mere legend have been inspired by something far stranger? And then there's the more fantastical theory, the idea that the children were not from this world at all, but from a parallel dimension or a time far removed from our own. Were they visitors from another realm, their sudden arrival a glitch in the fabric of reality? It's a theory that, though speculative, is not entirely outside the realm of possibility, given the strange and inexplicable nature of their story. In the centuries since the green children were discovered in Woolpit, the mystery has never been fully resolved. There are no records or further details about their lives after they integrated into the community. What became of the girl? Did she marry, have children, and live out her life in relative obscurity? Or did she too vanish into the mists of history, her story lost to time? The Green Children of Woolpit remain a deeply enigmatic case, one that raises more questions than it answers. Were they simply victims of illness and isolation, or were they something far more mysterious? The truth of their origins, like so many other historical mysteries, may never be fully known. As we look at the records of their time, their story stands as a haunting reminder of the unknowns that still lurk in the shadows of history. And as we reflect on the strange green children who appeared in a small English village centuries ago, we are left with one persistent question. Could the tale of the Green Children of Woolpit be a glimpse into something far stranger, still hidden in the vast expanse of history? Or are we simply witnessing the echoes of a legend that time has twisted into mystery? As we journey through history's most perplexing mysteries, we arrive at a towering enigma of ancient Africa, Great Zimbabwe. Once the heart of a mighty empire, its ruins now stand as silent monuments to a civilization that rose to unparalleled heights before suddenly fading into obscurity. Stretching over 1,000 acres, the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe, with their iconic dry stone construction, seem almost as if they were built to last forever. Yet, for all their enduring grandeur, the question remains: what happened to the people who created this extraordinary civilization? The ruins of Great Zimbabwe sit within the modern-day borders of Zimbabwe, nestled in the southeastern hills of the country. The site's centerpiece is the Great Enclosure, an enormous circular wall surrounding a large open courtyard. Its stone walls rise more than 30 feet in places, with intricate passages and chambers that seem to whisper of a bygone culture's mysteries. These walls, though worn by centuries of time, still convey the grandeur of a civilization that thrived from the 11th to the 15th centuries. Once, this city was bustling with life, its people engaged in trade, agriculture, and the crafting of stunning gold and stone artifacts. Yet despite its cultural richness and historical significance, Great Zimbabwe was abandoned long before it reached its peak. What led to the decline of this powerful empire? And why did such an advanced civilization disappear without a trace? The mainstream explanation points to environmental factors. Scholars suggest that the city's rapid expansion, combined with extensive deforestation for building materials and fuel, led to the depletion of local resources. The surrounding landscape, once lush and fertile, may have deteriorated as the soil was eroded by farming and the needs of a growing population. Some argue that as the environment grew more hostile, food and water supplies became increasingly scarce, forcing the people of Great Zimbabwe to migrate to more hospitable areas. But while environmental decline seems like a plausible cause for the empire's eventual collapse, it does not fully explain the abruptness of the disappearance. There were no large-scale invasions or natural catastrophes recorded at the time to account for such a sudden abandonment. The decline appears to have been gradual, and yet the city was left nearly empty. What could have driven the inhabitants to leave behind such a sophisticated and thriving society? Theories diverge as we delve deeper into the mystery. One explanation often discussed is the possible role of the empire's trade networks, which once connected Great Zimbabwe with distant parts of Africa and the Middle East. Zimbabwe's gold, which was widely traded, was highly prized, and the civilization's location at the crossroads of several important trade routes provided it with immense wealth. However, by the 15th century, the rise of new trade routes and the shift in global commerce patterns may have contributed to the empire's decline. With the decline of the gold trade and the rise of other powers, such as the Portuguese on the coastal regions, Great Zimbabwe's economic influence could have gradually eroded, leading to the abandonment of the city. Another compelling theory suggests that the shift in political and religious ideologies may have played a crucial role in the decline. Great Zimbabwe was a center for both political and spiritual power. The rulers of the kingdom were seen as divinely chosen, their influence extending not just over land and people, but also over the religious practices of their society. However, as new leadership emerged in the region, the old religious and political systems may have faltered, sparking internal conflicts that could have weakened the empire. Was the fall of Great Zimbabwe, in part, the result of a struggle for power, one that ultimately led to the fragmentation of the society? Yet, there are more speculative and intriguing theories that explore the possibility of something beyond mere environmental or political factors. Could the collapse have been triggered by an unknown force, perhaps an internal spiritual or cultural shift that prompted the people to abandon their great city? Some have suggested that the people of Great Zimbabwe may have left in response to mysterious omens or events, possibly even driven by their own beliefs in the supernatural. Could the very culture that built this marvel of stone walls have felt that their city no longer held meaning, that it had served its purpose and needed to be left behind? There are also those who have speculated that the decline of Great Zimbabwe was tied to conflicts with neighboring groups. The rise of other African empires, such as the Kingdom of Mutapa, may have led to internal divisions or external pressures that hastened the abandonment of the city. Could the people of Great Zimbabwe have been displaced by rival powers, their once great empire overtaken by forces they could no longer control? And then there are the fringe theories, some of which suggest that the fall of Great Zimbabwe was linked to a more cosmic event. Could the people of Zimbabwe have abandoned their city in response to a celestial phenomenon, an eclipse, a comet, or some other event that they believed signaled a need to leave? Or, even more outlandish, could there be some connection between the city's decline and lost knowledge, such as secret technologies or ancient wisdom that was deliberately hidden away for future generations to uncover? Regardless of the theories, the fact remains that the mystery of Great Zimbabwe's decline persists, even after decades of research. The city's majestic ruins continue to stand as a testament to the ingenuity and ambition of its people, but the reasons behind its sudden disappearance remain shrouded in uncertainty. As we look at the ruins today, the weight of history presses down on us, inviting us to wonder, what truths are still hidden beneath the stone walls of Great Zimbabwe? What knowledge, what wisdom, what untold stories were lost to the ages when this once great empire faded into the annals of history? While scholars have pieced together fragments of the puzzle, the full story of Great Zimbabwe's fall may still be waiting to be uncovered, a riddle that time has yet to solve. As we journey deeper into the annals of history, we encounter one of the most dramatic and inexplicable moments in the military history of Japan, the Mongol invasions of the late 13th century. The Mongol Empire, having swept across vast portions of Asia, set its sights on Japan, believing it was the next logical conquest in their relentless expansion. What followed was not just a military campaign, but a series of events that would spark both awe and disbelief, leaving behind one of history's most mysterious and contested phenomena, the kamikaze storms. In 1274, the first Mongol invasion force set sail from Korea, aiming to conquer Japan and expand the empire's reach even further. The Mongol fleet, a massive force consisting of hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of soldiers, arrived off the shores of Kyushu, Japan's southernmost island. Despite the overwhelming odds, the Japanese defenders, samurai and local militia, managed to resist, though at great cost. The Mongol army, which had expected swift victory, faced fierce opposition, and after only a few days of skirmishing, the invasion was forced to retreat. But what was it that caused the Mongols to retreat so abruptly? A violent storm. This was no ordinary storm, but a powerful typhoon that swept through the Mongol fleet, causing widespread destruction and scattering the ships. The storm became the first in a series of violent natural disasters that would come to be seen as a divine intervention, a sign that Japan was protected by the gods themselves. The Mongols, for all their might, had been undone not by the Japanese warriors, but by nature's ferocity. Just a few years later, in 1281, the Mongols returned with an even larger fleet, more than 4,000 ships, and an army numbering in the tens of thousands. They were determined to finish what they had started, believing that the conquest of Japan would be a crucial step in the empire's dominance. This time, they came prepared for a prolonged siege, expecting to overwhelm the Japanese defenders with their superior numbers and resources. However, once again, disaster struck. As the Mongol fleet anchored off the shores of Kyushu, ready for battle, another typhoon, a storm of unprecedented strength, suddenly struck. This storm was so fierce, so devastating, that it destroyed the Mongol fleet almost entirely. It is said that hundreds of ships were sunk, thousands of soldiers drowned, and the remainder of the Mongol forces were forced to retreat in disarray. The Japanese, seeing the destruction of the Mongol invaders as nothing short of a miraculous event, named these storms kamikaze, or divine winds. To the people of Japan, it seemed as if the gods themselves had intervened to protect the island from foreign conquest. The Mongols, with all their might and military strategy, had been vanquished not by the sword, but by nature's wrath. For centuries, the kamikaze storms have been remembered as the ultimate expression of divine protection for Japan, a mystical event that defied logic and chance. But while the stories of these divine winds became legendary, questions remain about the true cause of the storms and whether the destruction of the Mongol fleets was purely the result of natural forces, or whether there might have been something more at play. Historically, the storms were likely a series of typhoons, which are not uncommon in the region. The Sea of Japan, particularly around the Korean Peninsula and Japan, is known for its violent and unpredictable weather, especially during the summer months when typhoons are more frequent. In fact, modern research has suggested that the 1281 storm could have been a particularly strong typhoon, one with the capacity to destroy a fleet of ships and alter the course of a military campaign. But some have questioned whether these storms were purely coincidental. Could the Mongols have underestimated the power of the region's weather? Or was there something more mysterious? Something beyond the reach of military strategy and natural explanation? Some fringe theories suggest that the storms could have been the result of human intervention, perhaps a deliberate act of sabotage or manipulation of weather patterns, though there is no historical evidence to support such a theory. Another theory posits that the kamikaze storms were not merely the result of chance, but a symbol of the divine will that the Japanese believed was protecting them from foreign invaders. Could the Japanese have interpreted these storms as a message, reinforcing their belief in their divine protection? If so, could the storms have been viewed as a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the belief in divine intervention influenced the perception of the storm's true cause? The idea of divine intervention, of nature itself turning against the invaders, certainly added to the mythic status of the kamikaze. But could it also explain the deep psychological impact the storms had on both the Mongols and the Japanese? For the Mongols, these storms must have seemed like an insurmountable force, one that no army, no matter how powerful, could defeat. For the Japanese, the storms cemented their faith in the belief that Japan was invincible, shielded by divine favor. In modern times, historians and meteorologists continue to debate the cause of the storms. While the natural explanation of typhoons remains the most widely accepted, there are still elements of the story that continue to defy full explanation. How could the Mongols, with their vast resources and military prowess, fail twice in the same way? And why did Japan emerge unscathed, seemingly untouched by the might of one of the most powerful empires in history? As we reflect on the story of the Mongol invasions and the kamikaze storms, we are left with a lingering sense of mystery. What truly caused the Mongol fleets to be destroyed? Was it simply a matter of bad luck and fierce weather? Or was there something more, something beyond our understanding, that shaped the course of history? The kamikaze storms remain an enduring mystery, one that continues to capture the imagination of those who seek to uncover the unexplained forces that shape our world. As we continue to explore some of history's most perplexing and unsettling mysteries, we now turn our attention to one of the greatest maritime enigmas of the early modern world, the lost fleet of Zheng He. The name Zheng He may not immediately ring bells for most outside of historical circles, but his story is one that stretches far beyond the realms of legend, leaving behind a shadowy trail of unanswered questions. His voyages, filled with grandeur, ambition, and an astonishing array of ships, might have reshaped the global landscape, yet records of his final voyages remain mysteriously elusive, as if swallowed by the sands of time. Zheng He was a eunuch, a servant who rose to prominence in the early 15th century under the Ming dynasty in China. His stature, both in court and as a commander of the imperial fleet, was unparalleled. Between 1405 and 1433, Zheng He led 7 monumental expeditions, known as the treasure voyages, which carried him across the Indian Ocean, reaching as far as East Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. His fleet was a marvel of engineering, with hundreds of ships, including massive treasure ships, some said to be up to 400 feet long, and thousands of sailors. These expeditions were not merely about trade or diplomacy. They were, in many ways, a display of China's power and influence, an attempt to assert Chinese dominance across the seas, with an eye toward establishing tributary relationships with distant lands. However, as astonishing as these voyages were, the last 2 expeditions, those taken between 1431 and 1433, remain shrouded in mystery. Unlike the earlier voyages, which were meticulously recorded, the final voyages of Zheng He have left few traces in historical records. Why, after these massive and well-documented journeys, did the chronicles of the last expeditions suddenly stop? What became of the great fleet, the enormous ships, and the thousands of sailors who had sailed so far and wide? And most perplexing of all, why did China, the most powerful maritime empire of the age, suddenly abandon its naval dominance, turning inward and forsaking its maritime ambitions? The available historical records provide little in the way of definitive answers. The most common explanation points to the sudden death of the Mongol emperor, the emperor who had championed Zheng He's voyages in 1424. Following his death, his successor, Emperor Hongxi, took a less favorable view of the maritime expeditions. The imperial court's focus shifted away from naval power, favoring domestic concerns and the strengthening of the empire's land-based resources. The imperial archives were purged, and many records of the voyages were destroyed or lost. Some suggest that the destruction of these documents was part of a broader attempt to erase the legacy of the maritime expeditions, a reflection of the changing political climate within China. However, the disappearance of the fleet itself remains more enigmatic. After the 1433 voyage, Zheng He's fleet simply vanished from the historical record. No clear explanation exists for why the fleet returned to China or what happened during its final days at sea. Was the fleet lost in a natural disaster? Was it attacked by pirates or foreign adversaries? Or perhaps, as some have speculated, did the fleet meet with some other, more mysterious fate, one that has been intentionally obscured over the centuries? A leading theory is that Zheng He's fleet simply fell victim to the changing tides of imperial policy. With the new emperor's ascension, the vast, expensive fleet of Zheng He became less of a priority. Instead of continuing their grand voyages, the ships were either decommissioned or repurposed, and the crews dispersed. This theory suggests that the wealth and resources of the fleet were abandoned in favor of political consolidation and internal stability. However, the fact that no records seem to exist of the fleet's decommissioning or return creates an unnerving gap in the narrative. Another more speculative theory suggests that Zheng He's fleet may have faced a far more extraordinary fate. Some suggest that the fleet could have made it to the Americas centuries before Columbus set sail, based on certain evidence of Chinese artifacts found in the New World. Could Zheng He's ships have reached the shores of the Americas and established trade routes or colonies, only for their discoveries to be lost to time? While this theory is largely considered fringe, the possibility that Zheng He's fleets might have ventured farther than anyone could have imagined continues to provoke debate. Yet, the most perplexing idea surrounding Zheng He's final voyages remains the suggestion that the fleet may have been deliberately erased from history. Could there have been an intentional cover-up of the fleet's fate? Could those who stood to lose the most from the knowledge of Zheng He's expeditions, such as rival powers or even members of the imperial court, have worked to obscure or destroy any trace of the fleet's final moments? The complete lack of a definitive historical record only deepens the suspicion that there is something deliberately hidden. As we contemplate the mysteries of the lost fleet, we cannot ignore the broader implications of Zheng He's voyages. His fleets, which once stood as symbols of Chinese naval supremacy, vanished almost without a trace, leaving behind a fragmented narrative and an enduring mystery. Was Zheng He's grand vision cut short by the changing political tides of China, or was there something more extraordinary at play, something so far beyond the conventional understanding of history that it remains obscured, just beyond reach? As we stand on the shores of this lost history, we are left with a series of questions that time has yet to answer. Where did Zheng He's fleet truly go after its final voyage? Did it meet with some tragic end? Or did it venture into realms of discovery that were too controversial for the empire to acknowledge? What is the true legacy of these voyages, and how much of it remains hidden in the mists of time? The lost fleet of Zheng He remains one of history's most enduring and unsettling mysteries, waiting to be uncovered, if only we could find the missing pieces that might finally reveal the truth. As we continue our exploration of history's most perplexing and unsettling mysteries, we now turn to the ancient city of Cahokia, a once thriving metropolis in the heart of what is now the American Midwest. Nestled on the banks of the Mississippi River, Cahokia flourished around 1,000 years ago, reaching its peak between 1050 and 1200 CE. At its height, it was one of the largest and most influential urban centers in North America, with a population that may have numbered in the tens of thousands. Today, only the remnants of its towering earthen mounds and a scattering of artifacts remain. But the city's sudden and unexplained decline continues to haunt historians and archaeologists alike. Cahokia's centerpiece, Monk's Mound, is the largest pre-Columbian earthwork in the Americas, towering over the surrounding landscape. Its immense size, standing nearly 100 feet tall and covering 14 acres, suggests the monumental effort that went into its construction. It is believed to have been both a ceremonial and political center, possibly housing the ruling elite of the society. Surrounding it were hundreds of smaller mounds, arranged in a complex and carefully planned layout that reveals the sophistication of the Cahokian civilization. The city was also a hub of trade, as its strategic position along the river connected it to far-reaching networks across the continent. The people of Cahokia engaged in agriculture, crafting, and ritual practices that reflected a deeply organized society with a rich cultural heritage. Yet, for all its grandeur, Cahokia's decline remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in North American history. By the 14th century, just a few generations after its zenith, the city was largely abandoned, its once bustling streets empty, its monumental mounds standing in quiet solitude. What caused such a rapid and dramatic collapse of a civilization that had been so advanced and vibrant? Historians have long debated the reasons behind Cahokia's fall, and several factors have been proposed. One of the most widely accepted explanations is environmental stress. The people of Cahokia depended heavily on maize farming, and it is believed that over time, the intensive agricultural practices, combined with deforestation and soil depletion, may have led to a decline in the region's fertility. As the land grew less productive, food shortages may have triggered social unrest, leading to the city's eventual abandonment. However, the environmental theory does not fully explain the suddenness of the collapse. If the decline was gradual, why did it occur so rapidly? And why did the inhabitants of Cahokia abandon the site altogether, rather than adapting to the changing conditions, as other societies in the region had done? This has led some scholars to suggest that there were additional factors at play, perhaps even a combination of environmental and social stressors. One speculative theory proposes that Cahokia's rulers were overthrown in a political revolt. Evidence of human sacrifice and violent rituals at some of the site's ceremonial mounds suggests that the city may have been ruled by a powerful and possibly oppressive elite. If the rulers became too detached from the needs of the common people, it's conceivable that internal conflict could have sparked a collapse. Such a revolt could have led to the city's abandonment as people sought refuge elsewhere, away from the violence and instability of their former home. Another theory, perhaps more controversial, involves the role of warfare. While there is little direct evidence of large-scale conflict, it is possible that Cahokia faced pressure from surrounding groups. The city's immense size and wealth would have made it a target for neighboring tribes, and it's plausible that warfare, or the threat of it, could have destabilized the once thriving center. The collapse might have been the result of a series of raids, or even a large-scale attack that rendered the city uninhabitable. Then, there is the suggestion that Cahokia's decline was due to cultural or religious upheaval. Some researchers have pointed to evidence that suggests a shift in religious practices or the abandonment of certain ritualistic sites. The possibility that the people of Cahokia experienced a profound spiritual crisis, possibly triggered by a breakdown in social order or a loss of faith in the city's leaders, cannot be ruled out. Could the city have simply fallen out of favor with its inhabitants, leading them to abandon their former way of life? One of the most enduring and enigmatic theories, however, is that Cahokia's fall may have been tied to a cosmic event, something so cataclysmic and sudden that it left the people of Cahokia no choice but to flee. Could the city have experienced some form of environmental catastrophe, such as a series of devastating floods or droughts that overwhelmed the population in a short period of time? Or, as some fringe theories propose, was there an astronomical event, such as a comet or meteor impact, that altered the course of the city's history and caused the population to scatter? Yet, despite all these theories, the truth remains elusive. No single explanation fully accounts for the sudden collapse of one of the most complex societies in pre-Columbian North America. It's as though the people of Cahokia disappeared without leaving a clear record, vanishing into the mist of history. Archaeologists continue to dig, unearthing fragments of a once great civilization, but with each new discovery, new questions arise. As we stand before the remains of Cahokia today, the towering mounds seem to echo with the whispers of a lost world. What truly caused the city to fall? Was it environmental degradation, social unrest, or something far more mysterious? The answers remain buried beneath the earth, waiting to be uncovered. But the mystery endures, inviting us to ponder what secrets still lie hidden in the mists of time. As we journey further into history's most confounding mysteries, we turn our gaze toward the legendary and enigmatic settlements of Vinland, Viking colonies believed to have been established in what is now North America. The story of Vinland is one that has captivated historians, archaeologists, and explorers alike for centuries. And yet, despite the promising evidence of Viking presence in the New World, the ultimate fate of these settlements remains one of history's most compelling mysteries. Vinland, meaning wine land in Old Norse, was first described in the Vinland sagas, two medieval Icelandic texts, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red. These sagas recount the voyages of Leif Erikson and his crew, who, around the year 1000 CE, sailed westward from Greenland and landed on the shores of what they called Vinland. According to these accounts, the land was lush with resources, particularly vines, which is why it was given the name Vinland. The settlements they established were described as a place of abundance, where the Norsemen found timber, fertile soil, and, perhaps most tantalizing of all, grapes. The Vikings were not known for their agricultural expertise, yet the sagas paint Vinland as a rich and promising land ripe for settlement. However, what happened to these early Norse settlements in North America remains unclear. The sagas are vague, offering only fragmentary glimpses of life in Vinland and little in the way of concrete details. After Leif Erikson's voyage, the records grow even murkier, and eventually, the settlements vanished from history altogether. No one knows precisely when or why the Vikings abandoned Vinland, and the lack of physical evidence makes it difficult to unravel the true fate of these colonies. The first tantalizing clue that the Vinland story might have more truth to it than myth came in the late 19th and early 20th centuries when archaeologists uncovered remains of a Norse settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. The site, with its distinctive Viking-style turf buildings, clearly supported the idea that the Norse had indeed reached North America long before Columbus. Yet, while L'Anse aux Meadows is a significant archaeological find, it only represents one small portion of the larger Vinland mystery. The site was abandoned around the year 1100, but there are no definitive traces of other larger settlements, such as the ones described in the sagas. If the sagas are to be believed, the Norse did not simply abandon Vinland after a brief stay. They likely established multiple settlements, extending their reach along the coast of what is now Canada and possibly even into the northeastern United States. So why is there so little physical evidence of these other settlements? And more importantly, what caused the Norse to leave this land of promise, so rich in resources, after such a short period? One popular theory centers on conflict with the indigenous peoples of North America. The sagas mention violent encounters with the Skraelings, a term used by the Norse to describe the native peoples of the land. These encounters were described as hostile, culminating in battles that may have led to the retreat of the Norse settlers. Could these conflicts have forced the Vikings to abandon their colonies in Vinland? If so, why did they not return to settle on the land, as they did in other parts of their empire? Was it the violence, or perhaps a deeper cultural or economic challenge that drove them away? Another theory posits that environmental factors may have played a role in the disappearance of the Vinland colonies. The Vikings were expert sailors and traders, but their settlements were still heavily dependent on the land's resources. The colder, more temperamental climate of Newfoundland might have posed significant challenges to sustaining long-term settlements, especially if the Norse were unable to cultivate enough crops or trade for adequate supplies. Evidence suggests that the Vikings' agricultural practices, which had been successful in Greenland, were less effective in the harsher North American climate. Could a series of harsh winters or failing crops have forced the Norse to abandon their outposts? Then there is the more speculative theory, one that suggests that the Vinland colonies were not abandoned at all, but rather simply became integrated into the broader Norse world. Some have argued that, over time, the Vikings may have assimilated with indigenous tribes or formed hybrid communities, blending their culture with that of the native peoples. If this theory is true, it would explain the lack of further Viking settlements. Perhaps they remained, but their presence became increasingly indistinct in the archaeological record. This idea opens up a broader question. Did the Vikings truly vanish from Vinland, or did they leave behind a subtle trace that is yet to be uncovered? Still others have suggested that there could be evidence of further Viking expeditions buried somewhere along the North American coast. Could it be that more settlements, larger than the one at L'Anse aux Meadows, lie buried beneath centuries of soil, waiting to be uncovered? If so, why has no substantial evidence been found? Could the records of these expeditions have been intentionally suppressed, erased from history for reasons unknown? Were the Norse simply forgotten in the grand narrative of exploration, overshadowed by later European voyages? Despite the numerous theories, the ultimate fate of the Vinland settlements remains unsolved. The archaeological evidence, while intriguing, does not provide a definitive answer, and the sagas themselves offer no further insight into the precise events that led to the abandonment of the colonies. We are left with a tantalizing trail of clues, yet the deeper mystery endures. As we stand at the edge of this mystery, we cannot help but wonder, were the Vikings truly the first to establish lasting settlements in North America, or was there another force at play? Did the Norse abandon their colonies due to conflict, environmental factors, or something else entirely? And most haunting of all, what might still be hidden, waiting beneath the surface of time, to reveal the truth behind the lost settlements of Vinland? The mystery of Vinland endures, as elusive and captivating as ever, inviting us to dig deeper into the past, to search for the fragments of history that might hold the key to understanding what truly happened to the Viking explorers who once set foot on the shores of North America. As we continue our journey into history's most perplexing and unsettling mysteries, we now turn to the sudden and still unexplained death of William II of England, also known as William Rufus. The event took place in the rugged hills of the New Forest, a sprawling royal hunting ground in southern England, on August 2nd, 1100. On that fateful day, William Rufus, the second son of William the Conqueror, was struck down by an arrow, an incident that has haunted historians for centuries. Was it simply a tragic accident, or was there something more sinister at play? The scene is set. The New Forest, dense with trees and veiled in a quiet mist, echoes with the sounds of hooves and the occasional cry of a hunting dog. It is here that William II, the King of England, had ventured with his entourage. He was partaking in a typical royal hunting party, a pastime that was as much about power and spectacle as it was about sport. As William prepared to take aim at a stag, he was suddenly struck by an arrow, piercing his chest. He collapsed to the ground, dead in an instant. At first glance, it appears to be a simple, tragic accident, a hunter's misfortune. But the details surrounding his death are far from straightforward. The arrow, which struck him in the chest, came from one of his own men, Walter Tyrrell, a noble in his court. Tyrrell, according to the accounts, was nearby when the king was killed. He fled the scene almost immediately, and rumors began to spread that William's death was no mere accident. The strange circumstances surrounding the king's demise would become the source of speculation and intrigue for centuries to come. The official explanation given at the time was that William had been accidentally struck by an errant arrow while hunting, a tragic consequence of the dangerous sport. Tyrrell, who would later leave England in fear for his life, claimed that he had accidentally shot the king while aiming for a stag, but many have found this explanation too convenient, considering the potential political motives and power struggles of the time. William Rufus was not a king loved by all. His reign was marked by political instability and strained relations with the nobility, as well as tension with the church. He had alienated many powerful figures during his rule, and his unpredictable, often tyrannical behavior had earned him enemies in both England and Normandy. His death left England in a state of uncertainty, and a number of theories have emerged over the years suggesting that his death may have been a carefully orchestrated assassination. One popular theory is that William's death was engineered by his younger brother Henry, who would succeed him on the throne. Henry's motives for such an action seem clear. The death of William Rufus allowed him to ascend to the throne of England. The timing of the death, so convenient for Henry's ambitions, has led many to believe that he may have been involved in the king's death, either directly or indirectly. The fact that Henry was the first to arrive at the scene of the death, some accounts even suggest that he was the one to remove the body, only fueled the suspicions surrounding the event. Could Henry have ordered the death of his brother? Did he use the chaos of a royal hunting party to eliminate the one obstacle standing between him and the throne? Or was he simply an opportunist who seized upon a tragedy to claim the crown? No concrete evidence has ever emerged to support these theories, but the circumstances surrounding William's death, his brother's swift rise to power, the suspicious flight of Walter Tyrrell, have made it an enduring mystery. Another theory revolves around the possibility of a broader political conspiracy. William Rufus was deeply unpopular with many factions, including the Anglo-Saxon nobility, who resented his Norman rule, and even his own Norman supporters, who were discontented with his heavy-handed approach to governance. Could discontented nobles, perhaps working in secret, have arranged for his death? Were they motivated by a desire to see the throne pass to someone more pliable, such as Henry? The fact that the nobles did not pursue the matter aggressively suggests that they, too, might have seen benefit in William's death. Then, there are the more fringe theories. Some have suggested that William II's death was not an accident, but rather the result of a supernatural or divine intervention. Was it a punishment for his sins, a divine retribution for his harsh rule and contempt for the Church? Some contemporary chroniclers noted that William was deeply unpopular with religious leaders, having repeatedly clashed with them over his policies and treatment of church lands. Did the heavens, in their own way, bring about his untimely end? Despite these various theories, the death of William II remains unsolved. The mystery of his death is compounded by the fact that there are no direct witnesses to the actual moment of the king's death, only scattered accounts from those who were present afterward, and the men involved, most notably Walter Tyrrell, fled the scene almost immediately, never returning to England. This leaves us with a fragmented narrative and a lingering sense of uncertainty about the true nature of the events. As we look back upon the life and death of William Rufus, we are left with more questions than answers. Was he truly the victim of an unfortunate hunting accident, or was his death the result of a coldly calculated plot to secure the throne? Did his younger brother Henry play a role in the death of his sibling, or was the timing of the tragedy purely coincidental? And what role, if any, did the political climate of England play in this untimely death? The death of William II remains one of history's most enduring and unsettling mysteries, a shadow that still lingers over the early years of the Norman dynasty in England. It serves as a reminder of the unpredictable nature of power, the ruthless ambitions that often lie behind royal thrones, and the deep, unanswered questions that history sometimes leaves behind. What truly happened in the New Forest on that fateful day in 1100? Perhaps, like many mysteries of the past, the truth is buried forever, only the eerie whispers of a long-dead king to haunt us in the silence of history. As we move forward into another of history's most disturbing and unresolved mysteries, we arrive at the tragic and haunting case of Edward V of England and his younger brother Richard, Duke of York. The year is 1483, and the throne of England stands in a precarious position after the death of King Edward IV. Edward V, at just 12 years old, is thrust into the role of monarch, an age far too young for the immense responsibility. The political landscape is fraught with tension, and the young king is surrounded by intrigue, betrayal, and the shadow of his ambitious uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who would soon claim the throne for himself as Richard III. Edward V and his brother Richard were placed in the care of their uncle, who became their guardian following the death of their father. Shortly after their arrival at the Tower of London in the spring of 1483, however, both princes vanished from history. The brothers, known to have been held under guard within the tower, were seen for the last time in public on June 16th of that year, when they were spotted playing in the garden at the tower. Soon after, they were no longer seen, and no concrete evidence of their fate has ever surfaced. Their disappearance would spark centuries of speculation, fueled by political ambition, royal power struggles, and the eerie silence that followed their sudden vanishing. The Tower of London, a sprawling fortress on the banks of the River Thames, was not only a royal residence, but also a place of confinement and execution. For centuries, it has been a site of both grandeur and horror. Within its stone walls, the two young princes were imprisoned, their fate sealed by the tumultuous and often brutal politics of their time. The tower was an eerie and foreboding place in the 15th century, and it continues to loom large in the imagination, casting a long shadow over the mystery of Edward and Richard's disappearance. The official story, as told for generations, suggests that the two princes were likely murdered. Rumors spread quickly in 1483 that Richard, Duke of Gloucester, soon to be Richard III, had arranged for their deaths in order to secure his claim to the throne. The idea that Richard was behind the deaths of the boys gained considerable traction, especially after his ascension to the throne. His rapid rise to power, combined with the disappearance of the two young princes, made many believe that he had something to hide. The prince's disappearance was seen by many as an act of ruthless political maneuvering to eliminate potential heirs to the throne. But there was no direct evidence to confirm this theory, and Richard always denied any involvement. What happened to the princes remains an open question. Did Richard, desperate to claim the throne, eliminate the only other claimants to the crown, or was there something more complex at play? One possible explanation for their disappearance is that the princes were simply murdered, perhaps smothered or strangled in the dark, cold halls of the tower. This theory, while plausible, is based on scant evidence. In 1674, workers digging at the Tower of London unearthed two small skeletons buried beneath a staircase, widely believed to be the remains of the two missing princes. Yet the lack of conclusive forensic analysis leaves the question unresolved. Could these remains truly belong to Edward and Richard, or were they the remains of other victims of the tower's violent history? Another theory suggests that the princes were not murdered at all, but instead disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Perhaps they were secretly smuggled out of the tower and hidden away, their identities erased for their own safety. Given the chaos and shifting allegiances of the time, it's conceivable that the princes could have been removed from the royal court and raised in secrecy, their fate carefully concealed to protect them from the dangers of a violent political landscape. This theory is supported by some accounts that suggest sightings of the princes in later years, though these reports are often dismissed as unreliable. Others have proposed a more fantastical explanation, that the boys may have been involved in a larger plot to overthrow Richard III or to reclaim the throne for another faction. In this theory, the princes may have been part of a wider conspiracy that involved the forces of Henry Tudor, who would eventually become Henry VII. Some speculate that the princes, if they survived, may have lived in exile in France, or perhaps even in Ireland, where Tudor's supporters had strong ties. However, these theories remain speculative and lack firm evidence to support them. What is perhaps most unsettling about the mystery of Edward V and Richard is the sheer uncertainty of it all. The disappearance of two young boys, innocent in the eyes of the law, during a time of political upheaval, leaves behind only fragments of truth. The Tower of London, with all its secrets, holds its silence on the fate of these lost princes. The official narrative suggests that the boys were murdered, but no conclusive evidence has ever been found to confirm this claim. One might wonder, why have we never been able to definitively answer this question? Could the evidence be buried in an undiscovered grave, or was it lost in the centuries of intrigue and shifting loyalties that followed the death of Richard III and the rise of the Tudors? Were the boys truly murdered, or was their disappearance the result of a larger, more complex political struggle that continues to elude us? The fate of Edward V and his brother Richard remains a profound mystery, one that speaks to the fragility of power, the ruthlessness of ambition, and the untold stories that history sometimes chooses to leave behind. What truly happened to these young princes? Are their remains hidden in the depths of the Tower of London, waiting to be discovered? Or does the truth lie somewhere in the shadows of history, forever out of reach? These are the questions that continue to haunt the story of the princes in the tower, a mystery that, like so many before it, may never be fully solved. As we continue our journey into the world's most perplexing and unexplained historical mysteries, we arrive at a story that takes us to the coast of East Africa, to the island of Kilwa Kisiwani. This island was once the heart of a flourishing kingdom, a powerful center of trade and culture. It stood as one of the greatest city-states of the Swahili coast, thriving between the 10th and 15th centuries. Today, however, the site is a shadow of its former glory. The decline of Kilwa Kisiwani remains one of history's most enigmatic fallouts, an abrupt disappearance of power that seems to defy explanation. The island itself is striking. Kilwa Kisiwani, with its ancient coral stone ruins, still whispers the echoes of a once vibrant civilization. Situated off the coast of modern-day Tanzania, Kilwa was once home to impressive structures, including the Great Mosque and the massive stone palace of the Sultan. Its people, rich from the bustling trade of gold, ivory, and slaves, were intricately connected to a vast network of merchants spanning from Arabia to India and even China. Kilwa was a jewel in the crown of the Indian Ocean trade routes, a gateway between Africa and the wider world. At its height, Kilwa was not only a hub of commerce, but also a cultural melting pot. Its people spoke Swahili, a language shaped by centuries of interaction with traders from across the globe. Kilwa's strategic position allowed it to control maritime trade routes, which brought in both wealth and prestige. Yet, by the 16th century, the power of Kilwa had crumbled. What happened to cause such a dramatic fall of one of the region's most powerful kingdoms? The conventional explanation often points to external factors, namely the arrival of the Portuguese in the 16th century. In 1505, the Portuguese arrived in East Africa, and their presence would have profound effects on the region. Kilwa, like other Swahili city-states, became a target for Portuguese colonial ambitions. They sought to control the lucrative Indian Ocean trade and disrupt the power of independent coastal kingdoms. The Portuguese, with their superior naval forces, soon began to disrupt the established trading networks, including those centered around Kilwa. By 1513, the Portuguese had seized Kilwa, marking the beginning of its decline. Though the city remained an important trading port for a time, the Portuguese occupation was deeply destabilizing. Kilwa's rulers were gradually replaced, its wealth plundered, and its once thriving commercial connections severed. The city's decline seemed inevitable after this shift in power. But while the fall of Kilwa is often framed as the result of Portuguese colonialism, the story doesn't fully explain the extent of its collapse. There are other theories, ones that explore internal factors and even suggest more mysterious causes for the city's downfall. Some historians point to environmental changes that may have played a role. Kilwa Kisiwani, like many coastal cities, depended on its natural environment for sustenance and trade. The island is particularly vulnerable to shifts in weather patterns, such as droughts, which could have impacted the agricultural output and, by extension, the economy. Evidence from tree ring studies and other climate records suggests that the region experienced periods of extreme drought during the time of Kilwa's decline, which could have led to food shortages, social unrest, and a weakening of the kingdom's power. Could the collapse of Kilwa Kisiwani have been accelerated by environmental factors that rendered the city increasingly inhospitable? Was the sudden depletion of resources an underlying cause of its downfall, compounding the external pressures of Portuguese invasion and competition from other rising powers? Another theory that has gained traction over the years is the idea that Kilwa's decline was, in part, the result of internal political strife. Like many prosperous city-states, Kilwa was not immune to power struggles among its elite. Its rulers, though initially strong and wealthy, may have been distracted by their own infighting, creating vulnerabilities that were quickly exploited by outside forces. Rivalries and factionalism within the ruling class could have created an unstable political environment, one that made it difficult to resist the Portuguese or to maintain the cohesion of the city-state. There's also the question of how much of Kilwa's elite class was willing to accept the Portuguese presence. Some sources suggest that certain factions within Kilwa may have collaborated with the Portuguese in exchange for power or wealth, further dividing the community and weakening the kingdom from within. This type of internal division, combined with external threats, may have hastened Kilwa's fall, leading to a city-state that was, in many ways, already divided before the Portuguese even arrived. But it is the more mysterious aspects of Kilwa's decline that continue to capture the imagination of those who study this lost civilization. While there are numerous accounts of the Portuguese attack, what remains unexplained is how quickly the city's power seemed to dissolve. Kilwa had long been a regional powerhouse. Its architecture, art, and trade networks were some of the most advanced in the Indian Ocean world. Yet within a few decades, the city had transformed from a thriving metropolis to a forgotten relic. Was this simply the result of the Portuguese conquest, or was there a more subtle, hidden force at work? Some theorists even suggest the possibility of a curse or supernatural influence, though of course this is speculative at best. Could there have been a larger, darker force, something beyond the tangible political and environmental explanations that contributed to the kingdom's sudden decline? Some locals in the area, even today, believe that the ruins of Kilwa Kisiwani are cursed, and the island's fall was the result of divine retribution for some unknown transgression. Whether this is a folkloric embellishment or an ancient belief rooted in truth is impossible to say. As we explore the fate of Kilwa Kisiwani, we are left with more questions than answers. Was the kingdom's decline the result of the Portuguese invasion, or did internal factors, be they political strife or environmental changes, lead to its demise? Could there have been a darker force at play, one that we may never fully understand? In the end, the fall of Kilwa Kisiwani remains an unsolved riddle. Its story is one of grandeur, mystery, and loss. Perhaps, as with many ancient civilizations, the full truth of its decline will never be known. The ruins of Kilwa still stand, silent and weathered, a testament to a once great civilization. What happened to Kilwa Kisiwani and its people? We may never know the whole story, but the mystery continues to draw us in, urging us to wonder what secrets may still be buried beneath the stones. As we continue to delve into the shadows of history, we now turn our attention to a mystery that remains largely forgotten by the modern world: the disappearance of medieval Persian expeditions. In the 10th and 11th centuries, the Persian Empire, then under the rule of the Buyid and Seljuk dynasties, was a formidable force in the Middle East. Known for their rich culture, intellectual achievements, and military prowess, the Persians were a key player in the complex web of medieval geopolitics. Yet, amid their successes, one of the most perplexing and unresolved mysteries of this era involves a series of Persian expeditions that simply vanished. These military and exploratory campaigns, launched from Persia's core regions into the distant lands of Central Asia, India, and beyond, are shrouded in a veil of secrecy and confusion. What happened to the soldiers, merchants, and scholars who embarked on these journeys? And why, despite their significance at the time, have these expeditions remained largely erased from the historical record? To begin, we must look at the backdrop of these expeditions. During the height of the Buyid dynasty in the 10th century, Persia was a center of learning, culture, and trade. The Persian Empire controlled vast territories, stretching from the Iranian plateau to parts of Mesopotamia and the Arabian Peninsula. It was a time of flourishing intellectual and artistic achievements, with scholars making advancements in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The Persian military, too, was a force to be reckoned with, powerful, disciplined, and ambitious. It was during this period that Persian rulers sought to expand their influence into regions beyond their traditional borders. One of the most famous expeditions was led by the Buyid ruler, Ahmad ibn Buwayh, who sought to extend Persian influence into Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. These campaigns were intended to strengthen Persia's control over trade routes, establish political dominance, and spread the Persian culture. Yet, as these expeditions ventured deeper into foreign lands, something strange occurred. In the year 1020, a large Persian military expedition set out for the region of Bukhara, a city of immense strategic importance along the Silk Road. The goal was to assert Persian power in Central Asia, an area contested by various Turkic and Mongol tribes. According to some records, the expedition had been sent with significant forces, including a mix of Persian soldiers, mercenaries, and scholars. However, the journey turned ominous shortly after the expedition crossed the Iranian border into the vast and treacherous steppes of Central Asia. In the historical accounts that followed, the expedition is said to have simply disappeared. What was supposed to be a major military incursion ended in total silence. The forces sent to Bukhara never returned, and no conclusive records or remains of the expedition have ever been discovered. The fate of the soldiers, their commanders, and the scholars remains a haunting question. What could explain this strange vanishing act? The first theory, perhaps the most straightforward, is that the expedition simply fell victim to the harsh and unforgiving terrain of Central Asia. The vast steppe, with its brutal climate and lack of resources, could have proved to be an insurmountable challenge for the Persian forces. If supplies were cut off, if they were ambushed by local tribes or rival factions, the Persian soldiers could have met their end in a slow and tragic demise. Perhaps they were simply overwhelmed by the hostile environment, unable to complete their mission or return to Persia. But this explanation, while plausible, does not account for the complete disappearance of the expedition, nor does it explain the lack of evidence. There were no reports of battles, no traces of the army's passage, no remains found in the regions where the expedition was believed to have traveled. Could the expedition have simply been erased from history by the ravages of nature? Another possibility is that the Persian forces were betrayed or sabotaged. Central Asia at the time was a mosaic of powerful and often competing factions, each with their own interests and alliances. It is conceivable that rival powers, whether local tribes or rival empires, could have conspired to undermine or destroy the Persian expedition. Perhaps the forces of Bukhara itself turned against the Persian invaders, leading to a hidden massacre. In such a politically volatile region, a sudden betrayal by an ally or a well-coordinated attack by an enemy could have led to the obliteration of the expedition without leaving behind any trace. Yet, another more speculative theory suggests that the expedition may have been caught up in an event far more mysterious, something beyond the usual military conflict or natural disaster. Some fringe theories propose that the Persian forces may have encountered something otherworldly, a disaster or force beyond the realm of ordinary human experience. Could there have been a natural catastrophe, like a powerful earthquake or a massive storm, that wiped out the expedition? The idea that a hidden force, be it a disaster or some unknown event, is responsible for the vanishing of the Persian expedition remains an unsettling possibility. However, such theories remain highly speculative and lack concrete evidence to support them. Then, there is the more cryptic and ancient theory that the expedition might have stumbled upon something hidden, perhaps a secret city or ancient civilization, lost to time, whose very existence was erased from the historical record. Some scholars have even suggested that the expedition could have discovered ancient relics or texts of immense significance, leading to a cover-up or deliberate erasure of the events that followed. The disappearance could have been deliberately concealed, its true nature hidden to protect those in power from the knowledge or secrets uncovered during the journey. Whatever the truth may be, the disappearance of the medieval Persian expeditions remains one of the most tantalizing mysteries of the ancient world. The details of what occurred to these brave men and women, their mission and their fate, have been lost to time. Were they swallowed up by the vast deserts and mountains, their lives snuffed out by the unforgiving natural world? Or was something more sinister or inexplicable at play? Did they find something they were never meant to find? As we examine the silence surrounding these expeditions, we are left with only questions. What happened to these ancient travelers? Were their lives simply lost to the inevitable passage of time, or is there something more to this story that we have yet to uncover? The disappearance of the medieval Persian expeditions is a mystery that remains unsolved, a haunting reminder that not all of history's secrets have been revealed, and some may remain hidden forever. As we journey further into history's deepest mysteries, we now find ourselves in the vast, unyielding expanse of the Sahara Desert, a place both beautiful and brutal, where time seems to stand still amidst the golden sands and sweeping dunes. The Sahara, once home to lush landscapes and thriving civilizations, is now a land of extremes, where the sun blazes relentlessly and the harsh winds conceal secrets that have long been lost to the world. It is here, in the heart of the Sahara, that medieval Arab rulers embarked on a series of expeditions, some of which vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the faintest hints of their existence. These lost expeditions are some of history's most unsettling and perplexing mysteries, where ambitious rulers set out to conquer the vast desert for riches, knowledge, and control, only to disappear into the sands, their fates unknown. The story begins in the 8th and 9th centuries, during the rise of the Arab caliphates, when the Islamic Empire stretched from the Middle East to North Africa and beyond. The Sahara, long a barrier between the civilizations of sub-Saharan Africa and the Mediterranean world, was seen by some rulers as a realm to be explored and conquered. The promise of untold resources and ancient trade routes that could connect the Arab world to the rich kingdoms of West Africa was too tempting to ignore. One of the earliest recorded expeditions into the Sahara took place during the reign of the Umayyad Caliphate in the late 7th century. Caliph Abd al-Malik, seeking to extend the influence of the caliphate, ordered the construction of the Dar al-Salam Road, a route designed to open up trade between North Africa and the distant lands of the Sahel and sub-Saharan Africa. To accomplish this, numerous military and exploratory expeditions were dispatched into the Sahara to survey the land, secure trading routes, and establish Arab influence. But something strange happened. These expeditions, which began with great promise and ambition, soon became shrouded in mystery. One of the most famous and perplexing cases involves the expedition led by the general Ibn al-Muhallab in the early 9th century. Ibn al-Muhallab's journey was intended to establish contact with the legendary gold mines of West Africa, a quest that had already drawn the attention of many medieval rulers. His forces, estimated to be over 2,000 strong, ventured deep into the heart of the Sahara. However, they never returned. The official records tell us little about their disappearance. Some suggest that they were lost to the desert itself, overcome by sandstorms, scorching heat, and a lack of supplies. Others believe that Ibn al-Muhallab and his men were ambushed by rival Berber tribes, or fell prey to the many dangers that lurked in the vastness of the Sahara. The lack of any survivors or detailed accounts from the expedition leaves us with more questions than answers. But this was not an isolated event. Another expedition, led by a ruler named al-Mahdi of the Abbasid Caliphate in the 9th century, set out to explore the Western Sahara in search of knowledge, wealth, and new territory. Like Ibn al-Muhallab's mission, this journey also ended in silence. Despite a well-planned venture into the desert, this expedition too disappeared without leaving a trace, and no one knows what ultimately befell its members. Theories surrounding these lost expeditions vary, but the absence of solid evidence has led to a number of fascinating and eerie speculations. Some believe that the expeditions were victims of the unforgiving desert climate, where dehydration, disease, and the sheer vastness of the Sahara could quickly overwhelm even the most prepared of travelers. The Sahara, after all, is a place where the horizon seems to stretch endlessly, and where entire caravans have been swallowed by the sands over the centuries. Could these expeditions have simply been wiped out by the desert's vast and unforgiving nature? But there is another theory, one that taps into the more mystical aspects of these expeditions' disappearance. The desert, with its ancient secrets and hidden oases, has long been a place of myth and legend. Some claim that the Sahara holds a certain enchantment, that it is a land capable of erasing the very existence of those who wander too far into its depths. Could the expeditions have encountered a force, whether natural or supernatural, that caused them to vanish without a trace? Was there something lurking in the heart of the desert, waiting to claim those who ventured too far? While these theories may seem fantastical, they reflect the sense of wonder and unease that the Sahara has inspired throughout history. The desert is a place that is both real and mythical, a realm where the boundaries between the known and the unknown often blur. And it is not just the medieval Arab rulers who have fallen prey to its mysterious allure. Other explorers, traders, and even entire civilizations have also disappeared within its vast, shifting sands. Another more plausible explanation centers around the idea that these expeditions simply became lost due to the difficulty of navigation. The Sahara, especially in ancient times, was a vast and largely unexplored wilderness, with little in the way of established routes or markers. Without the advanced navigation tools that we have today, travelers would have relied on limited knowledge of the terrain, and many caravans and expeditions lost their way. The constant shifting of dunes, lack of clear landmarks, and the disorienting vastness of the desert would have made it nearly impossible to retrace one's steps. In some cases, these expeditions may have been undermined by internal strife or betrayal. The people of the desert were often divided into various tribal factions, each with its own allegiances and rivalries. Were these expeditions sabotaged by local tribes who resented Arab encroachment into their lands? Were the men abandoned by their own forces, left to face the desert alone? As we examine these lost expeditions into the Sahara, we are left with more questions than answers. Were they simply lost to the unforgiving forces of nature? Or did something more enigmatic occur, something hidden beneath the surface of history? And, if these expeditions were erased by the sands of time, what might still lie buried out there in the desert, waiting to be uncovered? The Sahara remains a land of mystery and allure, a vast and empty place where the past is both obscured and preserved. The expeditions of medieval Arab rulers, their fates unknown, are just one chapter in the desert's long, enigmatic history. Whether they were lost to nature, fate, or something far more inexplicable, the question remains: what really happened to these lost travelers? Perhaps in time we will uncover the answers, or perhaps the Sahara will continue to guard its secrets, as it has for centuries. As we shift our gaze across the ancient landscapes of the Silk Road, we enter a realm once filled with life, commerce, and culture. Stretching from the bustling markets of China to the distant reaches of the Mediterranean world, the Silk Road was more than just a series of trade routes. It was a lifeline, a bridge between civilizations. Along these roads, caravan cities flourished, teeming with traders, travelers, and merchants who contributed to the exchange of goods, ideas, and innovations that shaped the course of history. Among these forgotten cities, some rose to prominence, only to suddenly disappear. Entire desert caravanserais, once bustling with the sounds of trade, vanished almost overnight, leaving behind only silent ruins in the scorching sands. The remains of these cities, such as the famed sites of Karakoram and Zheng He, seem to tell a story of unexpected and unexplained abandonment. What caused these once thriving desert cities, positioned so strategically along one of the world's most important trade routes, to simply vanish? It is in the vast expanse of Central Asia's deserts, with their seemingly endless stretches of dry, unforgiving terrain, that we find some of the most enigmatic cases. The city of Zheng He, for example, once stood as a flourishing hub in the heart of the Tarim Basin, a city carved into the very cliffs of the desert. It was a place where cultures intersected. Chinese traders, Persian merchants, and nomadic Central Asian peoples mingled under the shadow of grand temples, marketplaces, and homes. But, sometime in the 13th century, Zheng He was suddenly abandoned. The city was left intact, its homes and temples still standing, but its streets eerily silent. What happened to the people of Zheng He? How could such a significant trade city simply vanish? Other Silk Road cities share a similar fate. Merv, once one of the most important cities of the ancient world, was abandoned abruptly in the early medieval period. The Great Walled City, located in modern-day Turkmenistan, had long been a thriving center of trade and culture. It was renowned for its impressive architecture and vast marketplaces, where goods from across the world were exchanged. Yet, like Zheng He, Merv was abandoned, and its people seemingly disappeared. Though its destruction in the 13th century by the Mongols is often cited as the reason, some question whether the city's decline began long before the Mongol invasion. Was there something more to Merv's sudden fall, a force beyond the usual explanations of war and conquest? In these instances, one of the most perplexing aspects is the abruptness with which these cities were abandoned. There are no clear signs of a large-scale invasion, no evidence of widespread violence or destruction. Instead, what we find are well-preserved buildings, broken pottery, and objects left behind in their places. Was it a natural disaster? Could an earthquake, sandstorm, or drought have driven the population away? The desert, after all, can be both a cradle and a destroyer of civilizations, its environment unforgiving to those who fail to adapt. Yet many historians suggest that the true cause behind these abandonments may lie in a more complex interplay of factors, many of which are not immediately visible in the archaeological record. Economic collapse, for example, could have played a major role. As trade routes shifted or new alternatives emerged, the economic basis of these desert cities may have crumbled. Was it the rise of other trade routes, such as maritime routes that bypassed the central land corridors? Or did changing political dynamics, shifts in power, or the arrival of new rulers make these cities obsolete? The rise of Islam, for instance, had a profound effect on the Silk Road and its trade centers, altering the economic landscape in ways that may have led to the decline of some cities. Some fringe theories, however, dive deeper into the realm of speculation. One popular theory points to the sudden desertification of the region, suggesting that climatic changes or the overuse of water resources may have made the once thriving cities inhospitable. Were these cities abandoned not because of any immediate threat, but due to an insidious environmental shift, a slow but steady degradation of the land? Could this be the answer, hidden in the sands, to why civilizations that once flourished along these routes simply vanished? Was it climate change that brought the final blow, leaving no trace of those who once lived there? There are also suggestions that a hidden, more mysterious explanation could be at play. Some propose that these cities were abandoned due to supernatural or spiritual reasons, with rumors of unexplained phenomena surrounding them. Could they have been abandoned because the inhabitants believed the land was cursed, or perhaps feared an unseen force? The deep, mystifying silence of these ruins raises the question: did the people who once lived there simply vanish without a trace because they were driven away by something that transcends the purely material? Is it possible that these desert cities were left behind in haste, as their inhabitants sought refuge from an unknown danger? As we dig deeper into the causes behind the sudden abandonment of these cities, we are faced with more questions than answers. The ruins of Karakoram, with its abandoned streets and untouched structures, still seem to whisper the stories of the past, though those who could tell us what truly happened remain lost to time. Were these cities truly abandoned due to war, environmental changes, or economic decline, or were there deeper, more hidden forces at play? The sudden fall of these medieval desert caravan cities is a mystery that continues to captivate historians, archaeologists, and theorists alike. Could there be clues hidden beneath the sands, waiting to be uncovered? Or will these ancient cities remain silent, their secrets forever buried beneath the shifting dunes of time? As we leave the echoes of these ancient cities behind us, one question remains: what happened to the people of the Silk Road's desert cities? And what other mysteries, just as strange and elusive, still await discovery in the vast deserts of history? As the icy winds of the North Atlantic sweep across the desolate, rocky shores of Greenland, an unsettling silence lingers in the air, a silence that once held the hum of human endeavor. Greenland, with its vast expanses of ice and jagged coastlines, was once the frontier of Norse exploration. It was here, around the year 986 AD, that the great Viking explorer Eric the Red established the first permanent Norse settlements, carving out a place in the harsh landscape for himself and his people. These settlers came from Iceland, seeking new lands, driven by the same adventurous spirit that had pushed them across the seas to Iceland and further still to the shores of North America. For nearly 500 years, the Norse settlers of Greenland maintained their presence, carving out farms, building churches, and establishing a thriving community. Yet, around the beginning of the 15th century, these settlements, once a symbol of human resilience in one of the world's most inhospitable places, began to fade into history. The records that remain are sparse, and the events that led to the disappearance of Norse Greenlanders from Europe's historical records are shrouded in mystery. The exact reason for the sudden disappearance of contact between Greenland and Europe remains one of history's great enigmas. By the early 15th century, it was clear that something had happened to sever the ties between Greenland and the rest of the Norse world, particularly their homeland in Norway and Iceland. While the Icelandic sagas, rich in myth and legend, offer tantalizing glimpses of life in Greenland, they fall short of explaining why the Norse settlers vanished so abruptly from the historical narrative. The first signs of trouble emerged around 1400 AD. The bustling ports of Greenland's Norse settlements, which had once served as a hub for trade and communication with Norway, fell eerily silent. Letters and messages that had once flowed freely across the seas stopped arriving. The great churches and farms of Greenland, once home to thousands, began to fall into disrepair, and the settlers vanished from the historical record. Was it the changing climate that drove them to extinction, or was it something far more mysterious? Historians and archaeologists have long debated the cause of the Norse Greenlanders' disappearance. One widely accepted theory is that the climate began to shift. During the Little Ice Age, which began around the 14th century, temperatures in the North Atlantic region dropped, making agriculture and trade more difficult. Crops that had once thrived in Greenland's coastal areas began to fail, and the once nourishing pastures were lost to encroaching ice. As the Viking settlers struggled to survive in an increasingly hostile environment, it is believed that they may have been forced to abandon their farms and villages. But if climate change was the culprit, why did the settlers not simply relocate or adapt to the changing conditions? After all, the Norse were no strangers to hardship. They had conquered vast territories, from Iceland to parts of North America. They had long been expert navigators, capable of crossing treacherous seas. Could they not have used their skill to relocate southward or explore new territories? Why then did Greenland's Norse settlements collapse so suddenly? Some theorists suggest that the collapse of trade played a significant role in the disappearance. By the 15th century, Greenland's most prosperous industry, the export of walrus ivory and other goods, had dwindled. With the rise of new maritime trade routes and the increasing dominance of other European powers, Greenland's position in the global trade network weakened. As these economic ties were severed, the once thriving settlements, isolated and struggling, began to fade into obscurity. Yet, there are more speculative theories that venture beyond the practical explanations of climate and trade. Could it be that the Greenland settlers encountered a more sinister force? Some fringe historians propose that the Norse were affected by cultural isolation, a kind of psychological strain brought on by their isolation in such a remote and unforgiving environment. Were the Norse driven mad by the harsh realities of their surroundings, abandoning all hope and retreating into the wilderness? Others suggest that it was not the Norse themselves who disappeared, but that they were pushed out by the indigenous peoples of Greenland, the Inuit. As the Norse continued to struggle with the climate, perhaps they found themselves increasingly at odds with the local Inuit populations. Did the Inuit, more adapted to the frigid conditions, push back against the encroaching settlers? Did conflict or disease play a role in the settlement's collapse? Then there are those who point to the unexplained mystical elements of the Vikings' departure. With their reputation for myth and legend, the Vikings were steeped in supernatural beliefs. Did they encounter forces beyond their understanding, perhaps a sense of impending doom tied to prophecies or omens? The fact that the Norse Greenlanders were able to establish such a successful colony in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth raises an unsettling question. Could their sudden disappearance have been caused by something more than mere environmental or economic collapse? Was it fate or destiny that led them to vanish, leaving only their forgotten graves and abandoned settlements as a reminder of their once immense presence? The final disappearance of the Norse Greenlanders still holds many secrets. Some speculate that the last remnants of their settlements were slowly abandoned, with the final few settlers integrating into Inuit society, while others suggest that an unseen catastrophe led to their swift and total disappearance. No matter which theory one subscribes to, one undeniable fact remains. The Norse lost touch with Europe, and in doing so, they disappeared from history's pages, leaving behind only ruins and unanswered questions. As we look at the weathered remnants of Greenland's Norse settlements, their crumbling stone churches and empty farms, one question continues to echo through time. What really happened to the people who once thrived on the edge of the known world? Was it nature's cold grip that took them, or is there something even more elusive still hidden in the frost-bitten soil, waiting to be discovered? As the Black Death ravaged medieval Europe, the once bustling cities, symbols of commerce, culture, and power, began to empty. The plague spread quickly, first arriving in the Mediterranean ports in the mid-14th century before sweeping across the continent, leaving in its wake not only a high death toll, but a strange, eerie silence that would haunt the land for centuries to come. Entire cities that had once thrived with life now stood abandoned, their streets empty and eerily quiet, as if the very soul of the city had been consumed by something far more terrifying than the pestilence itself. The Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, would claim the lives of an estimated 25 to 30 million people in Europe alone, almost 1/3 of the population. But it wasn't just the plague that devastated these cities. there was something else, a strange phenomenon that puzzles historians to this day. Why, in some cases, did these cities seem to simply vanish? Some reports describe cities so deeply impacted that, even after the plague passed, they never truly recovered. Were they abandoned in fear, or was there something more, something beyond the plague itself, that led to their destruction? Take, for example, the city of Florence in Italy. Once a shining jewel of Renaissance culture, it was struck hard by the plague in 1348. Within weeks, the streets were eerily silent, homes left unoccupied, markets abandoned. Yet, while the city experienced devastation, some accounts describe an atmosphere of strange desperation and fear as the plague began to take its toll. Those who could afford to fled, leaving behind the poor and the sick. But what happened when the disease had run its course? Why did some cities, like Florence, return to life after the plague, while others, such as Avignon, remained in a state of near perpetual silence, as if the pandemic had triggered a chain of events that was far more than just the impact of disease? At the height of the pandemic, rumors began to spread, not only of the plague itself, but of strange rituals, burning fires, and mysterious disappearances in cities affected by the disease. In many cases, entire neighborhoods were set alight, seemingly in an attempt to cleanse the land. The idea of fire as purification was not uncommon in the medieval period, especially in places where it was believed that the contagion itself could be eradicated through flames. But was there something deeper to these fires? Perhaps a desperate attempt to erase the memory of the plague, or an eerie attempt to symbolically burn away the suffering? Even more perplexing is the eerie silence that followed in some cities. In places like Toulouse, Bologna, and even London, where once thriving markets and streets had echoed with life, there was nothing but a haunting emptiness. Even years after the pandemic, travelers who passed through these cities often reported that the streets felt abandoned, that something intangible had been lost, a quiet, unsettling emptiness that could not be explained by the loss of population alone. Historians have long speculated about the psychological and social effects of the plague, but what remains unclear is whether the physical abandonment of these cities was simply a consequence of fear, or whether something more profound was at play. Could it be that these places became a kind of living memory of death, where no one was willing or able to return, even after the disease had passed? Or was there something more hidden, something deeply ingrained in the medieval psyche that pushed survivors to leave these cities behind, forever altered by the trauma they had witnessed? It's clear that the Black Death did not only affect the physical well-being of its victims, it altered the very fabric of society. In some places, entire families and communities vanished without a trace, and the social structure that had once held cities together began to crumble. The mass hysteria caused by the fear of contagion often led to scapegoating, with entire groups, such as the Jewish population, being blamed for the outbreak. But beyond the social decay, there were the physical remnants of these catastrophes: abandoned homes, empty cathedrals, and deserted town squares, standing as a grim reminder of the city's fall from grace. But what happened after the plague? Were the remaining survivors truly able to rebuild, or did they find that their cities had become too haunted by the memory of death? Could it be that superstitions and fear of the disease's return led to the continued abandonment? Or were these places forgotten by time itself, the way certain events or locations seem to fade into legend, lingering in memory but never fully understood? Some researchers point to the possibility that the trauma inflicted on the people was so great that the very idea of returning to those cities became unbearable. But could it also be that, in some cases, the cities themselves became uninhabitable, not from disease, but from the psychological toll of the plague? After all, the plague didn't just kill, it shattered lives, tore apart communities, and made the once familiar feel strange and dangerous. As we look at the crumbling remnants of medieval cities, we are left with a series of unsettling questions. What did it mean for a city to be burned away by its own people, to be abandoned, never to return to its former glory? Did the plague leave a wound so deep in the cultural memory that even after the disease was gone, the pain and fear it caused never truly disappeared? And perhaps most disturbingly, was there something hidden in these cities that we will never fully understand? A darkness that the flames could not entirely erase, and that the silence might still hold? As the Byzantine Empire began to crumble in the 13th century, a staggering loss occurred, one so profound that its effects are still felt in the depths of historical research today. The royal archives of the late Byzantine Empire, once home to a vast collection of documents, records, and imperial decrees, have vanished. These archives, containing essential details about the empire's final years, its politics, and its interactions with the wider world, have seemingly disappeared into the mists of history. What could have caused this disappearance, and why have so many of these invaluable records been lost to time? Imagine standing in the heart of Constantinople, the imperial capital, where once sturdy walls encased grand palaces and chambers of knowledge. In those days, the Byzantine emperors ruled over a highly organized bureaucracy, and the empire's archives were crucial to maintaining order, governance, and diplomatic relations. Documents detailing treaties, military strategies, the names of officials, and imperial commands were kept meticulously, stored in secretive, guarded places. Yet, when the Ottoman Empire finally breached the gates in 1453, it wasn't just the Byzantine city that fell. It was a massive repository of knowledge and history that would never again be fully recovered. After the Ottoman conquest, the surviving records were scattered, some perhaps intentionally destroyed, others simply lost or forgotten. But even more puzzling is the complete absence of any documentation detailing the specific fate of the archives themselves. Where did they go? What happened to the treasures of knowledge once housed in the imperial libraries? For centuries, historians have debated and speculated on the fate of these royal archives, but answers remain elusive. One theory points to the chaotic aftermath of the siege of Constantinople. The city's fall was rapid and brutal, with fires ravaging buildings, including some that may have housed precious records. While many documents would have been lost in these fires, the sheer scale of the archives suggests that some would have been hidden away, protected in secret chambers or moved to other locations. Yet no records remain from this time to suggest where they might have been taken. Could they have been seized by fleeing nobles or taken by Ottoman officials seeking to claim the empire's legacy for themselves? Or perhaps they were scattered among the Byzantine exiles, who fled westward, hoping to rebuild the lost world of Byzantium. Others have speculated that the Byzantine archives were deliberately destroyed in an attempt to wipe away the remnants of the fallen empire. The notion of erasing history is not new. Many great empires in their final throes have sought to rid themselves of records that could challenge the new order. It is possible that, in the wake of the empire's collapse, the Ottomans intentionally destroyed these documents in a bid to prevent them from falling into the hands of opposing factions, or to prevent future generations from learning too much about the empire they had just conquered. A more speculative theory suggests that the archives might have been hidden, perhaps buried deep beneath Constantinople's foundations, or even taken out of the city and hidden in the surrounding wilderness. There are legends of secret Byzantine vaults or undiscovered chambers beneath the city, places where treasures and scrolls might still lie waiting to be uncovered by future adventurers. But no concrete evidence of such vaults has ever been found, leaving this theory in the realm of myth rather than fact. Perhaps the most unsettling thought is that the disappearance of the archives wasn't just a matter of accidental loss or destruction, but something more deliberate, something tied to the rise of the Ottomans and the political motivations of those in power. It is not uncommon for empires to erase their predecessors from history, rewriting the narrative to ensure the legitimacy of the new rulers. Could it be that the Byzantine archives were so full of sensitive information, detailed accounts of political deals, secret alliances, and military failures, that those who conquered the city saw them as too dangerous to keep? The deliberate erasure of inconvenient truths is a practice that spans time and empires, and perhaps the missing archives were sacrificed in the service of a new, more controlled narrative. Whatever the cause, the lost archives of the Byzantine Empire remain a haunting enigma. They are a reminder of how fragile history can be, how entire volumes of knowledge can be erased by war, chaos, and political upheaval. What might we have learned from those records if they had been preserved? What secrets about the final years of the Byzantine Empire, its interactions with other states, and its internal struggles might have been uncovered by those archives? And perhaps most chilling of all, the royal archives were not merely collections of paper and ink. They were windows into a once great civilization. Their loss feels like a theft of history itself, a missing piece that, had it been found, could have offered answers to countless questions. As we search for traces of these missing archives, we are left to wonder, will the mystery ever be solved, or will the secrets of the Byzantine Empire's last days remain buried forever, lost to time? As the cold winds of the Arctic howl across the frozen expanse of Canada, Greenland, and the high Arctic islands, one cannot help but feel the mystery that still clings to these remote, inhospitable lands. A land where snow and ice reign supreme, and where the faintest whisper of human presence seems so out of place. Yet centuries ago, this vast, frozen wilderness was the target of daring medieval explorers, whose ill-fated attempts to chart these lands remain shrouded in uncertainty. Among the most compelling of these lost ventures are the medieval Arctic exploration attempts, quests launched by Norse seafarers and later European monarchs, all driven by the hope of opening new trade routes and extending the reach of their empires into the icy unknown. They left behind little more than fragmented remnants, strange, barely decipherable traces of their expeditions, and a deep, lingering mystery that continues to puzzle historians and archaeologists today. Picture the scene. It's the early 14th century, and European mariners are preparing to embark on a journey into the Arctic. They have heard rumors, whispers of a land that lies beyond the northernmost reaches of Scandinavia, a vast, unexplored territory waiting to be conquered. The Norsemen, whose ancestors had already settled in the frigid lands of Iceland and Greenland, were no strangers to the harsh environments of the north. Their ships, capable of navigating both icy waters and open seas, were thought to be the perfect vessels for what would surely be the most ambitious of all voyages. In the spring of 1360, King Haakon VI of Norway dispatched a fleet to explore the northern Arctic coasts, aiming to expand Norse presence and to discover new trade routes. The ships and their crews set out toward the uncharted territories, but no record of their journey survives, and no clear trace of their arrival has been found. Were they swallowed by the unforgiving sea? Or did they find some remote outpost on the frozen coastline, only to disappear into the wilderness, never to be heard from again? Despite the Norsemen's extensive knowledge of Arctic navigation, the records are sparse, and much of their journey remains unknown. What could have happened to these sailors, so seasoned in their exploration of icy waters? Were they trapped by a sudden change in the climate, overwhelmed by the impossible conditions of the Arctic? Or could there have been a more mysterious force at work, perhaps something far beyond the capabilities of even the most experienced explorers of the time? The mystery deepens when we consider the Viking settlements that once dotted the coastlines of Greenland. These settlements, which thrived for centuries, suddenly disappeared without explanation. Could these explorers, the last of their kind, have fallen victim to the same fate? There are few traces left. No signs of battle or widespread destruction, just the empty echoes of a civilization that vanished, seemingly without a trace. The exploration of the Arctic did not end with the Norse. In the centuries that followed, other medieval explorers and monarchs sought to uncover the secrets of the North. The English, too, launched a series of failed Arctic expeditions in the 16th century, searching for a northwest passage to the wealth of Asia. Like their predecessors, these adventurers encountered severe weather conditions, treacherous ice floes, and an unforgiving environment that defied their every move. Sir Martin Waldseemüller's map of the New World, for instance, depicted islands and territories that may have been based on distorted accounts of earlier expeditions, but no conclusive evidence of their findings ever materialized. What then could explain the disappearance of these explorers? Some theories point to the changing climate, a period of cooling in the Little Ice Age that made the Arctic even more inhospitable. The warmer weather they had once relied on may have shifted, leaving their ships stranded in unmanageable ice. Others speculate that the search for trade routes and riches might have led these adventurers to overreach, venturing too far without the necessary resources, their expeditions lost to nature's indifference. Yet, the most intriguing possibility, one that has long intrigued historians, is that these voyages might not have been as unsuccessful as they appeared. The unexplained gaps in the historical record, the sudden disappearance of some expeditions. Could it be that these explorers made contact with remote indigenous peoples who did not leave behind written records? Could their survival have been deliberately hidden by the explorers themselves for reasons we may never understand? In the end, we are left to wonder whether these lost Arctic expeditions were victims of nature's cruelty, human overreach, or something even more elusive. Were these men simply lost to the Arctic's frozen grasp, or did they encounter a fate far stranger than we might dare to imagine? And as we continue to uncover evidence of their voyages, be it through archaeological discoveries or newly discovered historical records, the mystery may yet reveal its final secret. As the early Ottoman Empire began its monumental rise, vast territories once held by the crumbling Byzantine Empire fell into Ottoman hands. This expanding empire stretched its reach far beyond Asia Minor and into the heart of Europe, changing the landscape of the world forever. Yet, amidst this meteoric rise, a particularly perplexing mystery remains, one that has been largely overlooked in mainstream historical accounts. This mystery concerns the disappearance of early Ottoman frontier settlement records, a void that continues to baffle historians and scholars alike. The Ottoman frontier settlements, established along the empire's expanding borders, were key to securing its territory and spreading its influence. These settlements were not just military outposts, they were thriving communities, often built at the intersection of East and West, where a diverse array of cultures, languages, and religious practices converged. Strategically located along the borders of the empire, these settlements were intended to act as both defensive fortifications and agricultural hubs, securing vital routes and resources. Yet, despite their significance in the empire's expansion, there is a noticeable gap in historical records. In the early stages of Ottoman rule, during the 14th and 15th centuries, many of these settlements seem to have been quickly abandoned or lost to time. The records that would have chronicled their founding, development, and eventual disappearance are mysteriously absent. These settlements, once bustling with activity, have left behind only remnants, ruins of stone and wood, faint inscriptions in forgotten languages, and empty histories that remain silent. To understand the scale of the mystery, we must first look at the context in which these settlements were established. The early Ottomans were a nomadic Turkic people who began as a small principality in Asia Minor under the leadership of Osman I, the empire's namesake. Their rise, however, was swift. By the late 1300s, they had begun to push deep into Balkan Europe, using frontier settlements as springboards for further military campaigns. One notable example is the settlement of Gallipoli, the first major Ottoman outpost in Europe, established around 1354. Situated on the Bosphorus Strait, Gallipoli held immense strategic importance as it controlled the waterway connecting the Black Sea and Mediterranean. From this pivotal point, the Ottomans launched further campaigns into Southeast Europe. Similarly, settlements like Adrianople, Edirne, and Sofia grew in importance as the Ottomans advanced westward. However, the records of many early frontier settlements are alarmingly scarce, and there are signs that entire communities may have disappeared without a trace. Historical documents, including military reports, local accounts, and even architectural records, are strikingly thin when it comes to these frontier settlements. What could have caused this? Was it the destruction of records during the Ottoman sieges and military campaigns? Or was there something more deliberate at play, something hidden beneath the surface? Historians have long speculated that the absence of these records could be due to the dynamic nature of the Ottoman Empire's expansion. Frontier settlements, by their very nature, were often temporary or in flux. Military expeditions, shifts in imperial priorities, or changing political landscapes may have led to the abandonment of these settlements without documentation. It's possible that these records simply weren't seen as important or necessary at the time, given the focus on military conquests and the centralizing forces of the imperial bureaucracy. But there are other, more speculative theories that have emerged over time. Some scholars suggest that the Ottoman Empire's leadership may have intentionally erased the records of these early settlements to obscure their nomadic origins and to present a more civilized, organized image to the world. As the Ottomans sought to position themselves as rulers of a vast empire, could they have hidden the rough edges of their early settlement practices? Were these settlements destroyed, abandoned, or perhaps relocated to make way for a more organized and cohesive imperial narrative? And then, there's the question of whether the settlements themselves were affected by unforeseen disasters. The plague was a recurring threat during this time, and the Ottomans were not immune to its devastating effects. Could some settlements have been struck by disease or famine, erasing entire communities in a matter of months? The historical absence of records could easily be explained by the devastation of such events. Alternatively, could the sudden collapse of these frontier communities have been caused by other, less documented forces, such as invasions, rebellions, or political shifts within the empire? Perhaps most perplexing of all is the idea that these disappearing settlements could have been deliberately erased, either by the Ottomans themselves or by external forces, such as local rivals or insurgents. The mystery of these vanishing settlements challenges the traditional view of the Ottoman expansion and asks a deeper question. How much of the empire's early history has been hidden from view? As we continue to dig into the mysteries of the Ottoman frontier, one thing is certain. The missing records of early Ottoman settlements remain one of the most enigmatic chapters in the empire's history. And until those records, lost or hidden, are uncovered, the mystery will persist, leaving us to wonder what secrets lie buried beneath the shifting sands of time. Could there be more to these vanished settlements than we'll ever know? And what might still be waiting to be uncovered from the forgotten corners of the Ottoman world? The lush, rolling hills and dense forests of Central Europe have long concealed secrets, some of which have remained buried for centuries. Scattered across the region are the remnants of medieval mining settlements, once vibrant communities built around the extraction of precious metals like silver, gold, and copper. These settlements, once at the heart of Europe's industrial activity, now lie silent, forgotten by time and largely erased from historical records. Their sudden and unexplained disappearance forms one of the more chilling enigmas of the medieval era. Imagine standing in the midst of one such forgotten settlement. The forest around you is thick with trees, their roots gnarled and twisted, reaching deep into the soil, where traces of human activity are now barely discernible. Stones from ancient buildings, cracked and weathered by centuries of neglect, are half buried in the earth, their surfaces worn smooth by time and the forces of nature. There is little left to indicate what once stood here, only a few relics, an old smelting furnace, a rusted mine shaft, and the faint remnants of a road that once connected this settlement to the wider world. At its peak, these settlements were bustling hubs of activity, home to miners, craftsmen, and traders who toiled deep within the earth. The discovery of rich veins of metal would have led to a booming local economy. Goods were extracted, processed, and transported far and wide across Europe. Cities grew, markets thrived, and the wealth generated from mining helped fuel the rise of powerful kingdoms. Yet, within a short period of time, many of these mining communities inexplicably vanished. One of the most puzzling aspects of the disappearance is that no one knows exactly why these mining towns disappeared. Most of these settlements were established between the 12th and 15th centuries in areas rich in natural resources, such as the Ore Mountains and the Carpathian Mountains, spanning parts of modern-day Germany, Czech Republic, and Poland. These settlements seemed to prosper, with evidence of sophisticated mining techniques, smelting operations, and even rudimentary towns that supported entire populations. But by the 16th century, most of these once thriving communities began to fade away. Records of their sudden decline are sparse, and much of the cause remains a matter of debate among historians and archaeologists. One commonly proposed theory revolves around resource depletion. It's possible that, after centuries of extraction, the easily accessible veins of precious metals were exhausted. As the supply dwindled, the cost of mining increased, making it less economically viable to maintain these settlements. The miners may have simply packed up and moved elsewhere in search of new opportunities. However, the abruptness of their departure has left many skeptical of this simple explanation. Was the exhaustion of resources really the only cause? Some scholars believe that the decline of these settlements could also have been linked to a changing political landscape. The Habsburgs, who came to dominate much of Central Europe during the 16th century, may have shifted priorities, redirecting efforts toward other regions. In this view, the disappearance of mining settlements could be tied to larger shifts in power, as centralized monarchies and their policies had direct impacts on the livelihoods of smaller, more vulnerable communities. And then there's the theory of disease. The late medieval period was a time of great upheaval, with plagues and other diseases sweeping across Europe, claiming the lives of entire populations. Could a devastating epidemic have struck these mining communities, leaving them abandoned and empty? Evidence of mass graves has been found near some sites, hinting that disease might have played a role. But the question remains: if disease was the culprit, why was it so selective in its impact, decimating these communities while leaving other areas relatively untouched? Beyond these more conventional explanations, there are darker, more speculative theories that still capture the imagination of those who study these vanished settlements. Some believe that these communities may have been the victims of violent raids, perhaps by marauding bands of invaders or even neighboring rival mining towns. Were these settlements deliberately destroyed, their inhabitants driven away or killed? Or could the local authorities have forcibly evicted them to clear the land for more profitable uses, such as forestry or agriculture? A particularly intriguing and persistent theory involves supernatural or mystical causes. In certain remote areas, legends tell of powerful forces, hidden spirits of the mountains, or curses cast upon the miners for disturbing the earth's balance. Though more likely rooted in folklore, these theories nonetheless reflect the deep and often mysterious connection that people of the medieval period had with the land they worked. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of the mystery, though, is the utter silence surrounding the disappearance of these settlements. The records, if they existed, are lost to history. Did these communities simply fade into obscurity, as so many others have? Or were they erased by forces so powerful, so quiet, that we may never understand what truly happened. What remains of these medieval settlements are not just physical ruins, but the eerie absence of their story, lost to the shifting sands of time. Could these abandoned towns hold secrets that we will never uncover? What might we find if we dug deeper, beyond the stones and into the unwritten histories of the people who once called these places home? This mystery of the lost mining settlements of Central Europe may never be solved. But as we look at the empty ruins that dot the landscape, we are reminded that history is often not as simple as it appears. There are still places on this earth that hold their secrets tightly, refusing to let the truth slip free. What happened to the miners, the craftsmen, the families? And more importantly, what are we still missing from the records they left behind? As the warm Mediterranean winds sweep across the rugged hills and plains of the Iberian Peninsula, it is difficult to imagine that beneath these serene landscapes lies a complex and turbulent history. The late medieval Iberian wars, particularly those fought between the Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Portugal against the Muslim-held territories of Al-Andalus, were a time of great upheaval and fierce conflict. Yet, despite the intensity of these wars, something crucial is missing from the historical record. The chronicles, the first-hand accounts that would have shed light on the very fabric of this dramatic period. Imagine standing on the edge of a hill overlooking the plains of Andalusia. Below, you can almost hear the echoes of the past, the clash of steel, the cries of soldiers, the drumbeats of war. The landscape is dotted with ancient castles, fortresses, and the ruins of long-abandoned towns, all silent witnesses to the fierce struggles that took place here. Yet, despite the rich archaeological and material history that remains, we lack a key piece of the puzzle: detailed written accounts from the time, especially from the latter stages of the medieval period. The Reconquista, the centuries-long struggle to reclaim the Iberian Peninsula from Muslim rule, is well documented. But as we approach the 15th century, the historical narrative begins to fray. It is during this time, particularly in the final stages of the war, that key chronicles seem to have disappeared, leaving behind an unsettling silence. The chronicles that would have told the story of the fall of Granada in 1492, or the cultural clashes that shaped the region, are nowhere to be found. So, where did they go? The historical record from earlier periods, such as the 12th and 13th centuries, is far more complete. Chroniclers like Rodrigo Jiménez de Rada and Alfonso X of Castile meticulously documented events, producing detailed annals that covered battles, political intrigue, and the lives of monarchs. These chronicles were invaluable sources of information for modern historians, providing a window into the cultural and military complexities of the time. However, when we turn our attention to the late medieval period, the 14th and 15th centuries, we notice a distinct gap in these records. One theory suggests that the chroniclers of this time were simply overwhelmed by the rapid political changes occurring across the Iberian Peninsula. In the aftermath of the Black Death, which had decimated entire populations across Europe, it is plausible that the chroniclers of Iberia found themselves struggling to keep up with the constant shifting alliances and the resulting political chaos. The Christian kingdoms were engaged in almost constant conflict, both with each other and with the remaining Muslim forces, making it difficult to accurately record events. Perhaps the chroniclers' attention was diverted, or their resources stretched too thin, leaving the record incomplete. But why then does it seem like the later chronicles are so deliberately absent? Could there have been something more intentional at play? Some historians have speculated that the loss of chronicles from this time was the result of political censorship. As the Catholic monarchs, Ferdinand and Isabella, consolidated their power, they may have sought to control the narrative surrounding the final years of the Reconquista. With the conquest of Granada, a new era began, one marked by the Inquisition, religious persecution, and the establishment of a unified Catholic Spain. Chronicles that didn't align with the official narrative of the Catholic monarchs, or that portrayed the political situation in an unflattering light, may have been destroyed or deliberately suppressed. But if this theory is true, what happened to these documents? Were they intentionally erased? Or were they simply allowed to fade into oblivion, lost to time and the vagaries of history? There are few records to indicate whether the missing chronicles were ever collected, let alone preserved for future generations. Did the monarchs order the destruction of inconvenient histories? Or did the chroniclers, perhaps out of fear, simply choose not to write? There are also speculative theories that suggest a more mysterious cause. Could there have been something about the events of the late 15th century that was considered too dangerous to record? Did the rise of religious fervor and the consolidation of power lead to a climate in which writing the truth became a perilous act? Some have even suggested that the missing chronicles may have been lost in fires or other natural disasters, but such claims remain speculative at best. What is certain is that the gap in the historical record surrounding the late medieval Iberian wars leaves us with a puzzle that remains unsolved. We are left to wonder what these missing documents might have told us about the true nature of the end of the Reconquista, the motivations of key players like Ferdinand and Isabella, and the struggles faced by the people who lived through these turbulent times. Without these chronicles, the story of the Iberian Peninsula remains incomplete. As we dig deeper into the mysteries of this missing history, we must ask ourselves, how much of the past has been intentionally obscured, lost, or destroyed? What truths have been hidden, either by accident or design, and what might still remain to be uncovered? Could there be more, hidden somewhere, waiting to be discovered? The search for answers continues. As we journey through the forgotten corners of remote Europe, the landscape begins to take on an eerie stillness. Towering forests, mist-covered mountains, and deep valleys stretch out before us, hiding centuries of history beneath their serene exteriors. Among these isolated regions, long-forgotten monastic communities once thrived. They were the beacons of knowledge, faith, and cultural preservation during the medieval period, yet many of them seem to have disappeared without a trace. The question remains, what happened to these remote monastic communities? In the mountainous terrains of northern Spain, the wilds of the Alps, and the secluded valleys of Scotland, once thriving monastic orders were established to serve both religious and scholarly purposes. These monasteries were often built in places difficult to reach, seemingly isolated from the world, yet they were hubs of activity and centers of learning. Monks meticulously copied manuscripts, preserved ancient knowledge, and cultivated the land. Yet, over time, many of these monastic communities vanished, leaving behind only empty stone structures, faded manuscripts, and the whisper of forgotten prayers. Take, for instance, the Abbey of Saint-Maur in the French Alps, a place so remote that it once seemed far beyond the reach of both local conflicts and the turbulence of time. The monks here were renowned for their wisdom and devotion. The abbey's influence spanned across centuries. Yet, by the 16th century, its once vibrant community had mysteriously disappeared. Records of the abbey's existence grew sparse, and by the early modern period, it was as though the abbey had never existed. What caused such an abrupt end? Was it the ravages of time, a shift in religious power, or something far darker? Similarly, in the dense forests of Germany, the Cistercian monasteries, established in places so remote that they seemed unreachable, began to fade from the annals of history. The Cistercians were known for their rigorous commitment to both spiritual devotion and agricultural development. Their presence was marked by the creation of vast estates that transformed the land and enriched the local economy. But as these communities grew more remote, records of their existence grew sparse, and eventually their lands were abandoned, Some were later reoccupied by other orders, while others simply crumbled into ruin. Could it have been a shift in political power? A loss of royal patronage? Or did the monks themselves retreat into the wilderness for reasons we may never fully understand? As we move through the undulating hills of Scotland, we find another mysterious disappearance, the monastic community of Iona. The island of Iona was a cradle of early Christian monasticism, its abbey one of the most influential in the British Isles. Here, monks dedicated themselves to prayer, copying texts, and educating pilgrims. Yet by the 15th century, the abbey was abandoned, and by the 17th century, its lands and buildings were left desolate. What drove these monastic communities to leave? Was it the tumultuous nature of the times? Was it the result of shifting religious views? Or was there something more to it? Perhaps a sense of spiritual exhaustion, or a mystical reason known only to those who lived there. Historians have offered a variety of explanations for the disappearance of these monastic communities. The most widely accepted theory involves the religious upheavals of the period, especially during the Reformation and the rise of Protestantism. Many monastic communities were dissolved by royal decree or were forced to abandon their lands. Religious reformers sought to eliminate what they saw as corruption within the church. This prompted large-scale suppression of monastic institutions across Europe. The dissolution of monasteries in England under Henry VIII is a well-known example of how religious and political tides shifted, wiping away centuries of religious life. Yet, not all of these communities were dissolved for ideological reasons. There were also practical challenges. The difficult geography of the lands these communities occupied meant that they were often susceptible to raids or natural disasters. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe during the 14th century, left many religious centers depopulated and vulnerable. Some communities may have simply faded into obscurity, their once thriving societies abandoned due to a combination of isolation, disease, and lack of resources. But there are other theories, less commonly discussed, yet undeniably intriguing. Some historians have suggested that the monastic communities were driven out by mysterious forces. Could there have been something in the environment, the landscape itself, that caused the retreat? Was there something spiritual or supernatural that led the monks to leave, perhaps out of fear or divine revelation? Take, for example, the remote monastic communities in the Carpathian Mountains. The mountain range, shrouded in mist and legend, is said to hold an ancient spiritual energy that draws some while repelling others. Could it be that certain remote monastic orders, sensing an unsettling presence or believing their mission was complete, simply vanished into the mountains, leaving behind their stone walls as the only remnant of their presence? What remains now are ruins, overgrown with ivy, forgotten by time, and left to the elements. As we walk through these silent remnants, it's hard not to feel the weight of their mysterious disappearance. Was it the work of time, nature, or something more? The monastic communities of remote Europe may have left behind only their stone foundations, but in doing so, they've left us with a deeper mystery to solve. What caused their sudden and eerie silence? And what, if anything, lies hidden beneath the surface of their abandoned lands? In the end, as we stand among these ruins, we are left with more questions than answers. Could the reasons behind their disappearance be lost forever, buried beneath centuries of history? Or will new discoveries one day reveal the truth? As we turn our focus to the heart of inland Africa, we are drawn to the mystery of vanished trade routes, once bustling arteries of commerce, culture, and connection across the vast continent. Picture the dry, sun-scorched plains of the Sahel, where great caravans of merchants once moved between powerful kingdoms, trading gold, salt, ivory, and other precious commodities. These routes, winding through deserts, savannas, and rainforests, were the lifeblood of ancient African economies. But somewhere along the way, these vital corridors disappeared, shrouded in silence, as if erased from history. The trans-Saharan trade routes, for example, once linked the ancient empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai with the Mediterranean world, as well as the far-reaching markets of Egypt and the Levant. These routes were meticulously mapped by traders, with oases serving as resting points and settlements dotting the paths like beacons of commerce and civilization. For centuries, they carried goods between North Africa and the heart of the continent, enabling empires to thrive and shaping the cultural and economic landscape. But by the 16th century, many of these once thriving routes began to fade. The question looms large. What caused such a sudden and profound decline in the inland trade network? While the fall of empires and the rise of new routes certainly played a role, the reasons for the collapse of these trade routes are more mysterious than we often assume. Consider the Kingdom of Mali, a once flourishing empire known for its immense wealth and powerful connections through the desert trade. Timbuktu, its intellectual and cultural center, was a thriving metropolis of learning and commerce. Yet, despite its importance, the trade routes connecting it to the Mediterranean world began to weaken. What happened to the ancient caravans, whose camels once crossed the vast Sahara, carrying gold, salt, silk, and other riches? Did the sudden abandonment of these routes stem from the changing tides of empire? Or was there something more, something mysterious that caused this profound disruption? Historical records offer some insight, but they also add layers of uncertainty. European exploration in the 15th and 16th centuries brought new dynamics into play. As European merchants sought alternative sea routes to bypass the Sahara, many inland trade routes became obsolete. The Portuguese, for instance, began to establish trade networks along the coast, diverting much of the commerce from the interior. This shift, while understandable in its historical context, still does not explain the total disappearance of entire trade routes. Some historians suggest that the routes fell victim to changing environmental conditions. The desert is not an unchanging backdrop. It has long shifted, as evidenced by the fluctuating climate patterns in regions like the Sahel. Droughts, sandstorms, and other environmental factors may have gradually rendered the traditional trade routes less viable, forcing merchants to adapt or abandon the familiar paths. Could it have been that the environment itself turned against these trade routes, eroding them bit by bit over time? Then, there is the possibility of internal conflict. The rise and fall of empires in West Africa was often accompanied by dramatic shifts in political power. As kingdoms like Mali weakened and eventually fell to rival forces, the once protected trade routes became more vulnerable to attack and disruption. Raiders, invaders, and competing kingdoms could have struck at the heart of these trade networks, leading to their collapse. But why, then, did these routes disappear almost entirely? Why did entire caravanserais, oases, and marketplaces vanish with such suddenness? Some theories point to mystical or even supernatural causes, a suggestion that, while speculative, cannot be easily dismissed when considering the rich spiritual history of these regions. Were there spiritual beliefs held by traders or rulers that led them to abandon the routes for reasons beyond economics or politics? Could some sort of divine intervention, a curse, or a prophetic warning have prompted people to leave behind their trade routes as part of a larger shift in belief or societal structure? The mystery deepens when we examine the historical record of African kingdoms that were once at the center of these trade networks. While they certainly experienced economic decline and conflict, there are no clear explanations for the complete abandonment of their trade routes. This leads some to ask, was there a deliberate effort to erase these trade pathways from history? Or were they simply lost to time and forgotten by those who came after? Even today, remnants of these ancient trade routes lie scattered across the Saharan desert, abandoned forts, and long-forgotten cities covered in sand. The cities of Timbuktu, Zheng He, and others remain in ruins, but archaeological excavations have uncovered evidence of their former grandeur. Yet much of the historical knowledge about how these trade routes operated and ultimately collapsed remains elusive. Could there be more hidden in the dust of the desert? Are there clues buried in the ruins of the ancient cities that might finally unlock the mystery of the vanishing trade routes? Or is it possible that these routes and their stories have been lost forever, slipping through the cracks of time and leaving us to wonder about the true nature of their disappearance? As we stand in the heart of the Saharan expanse, the sand dunes shifting in the wind, one thing is certain: the mystery of the vanishing African trade routes is far from over. The answers may still be out there, hidden beneath the endless horizon, waiting for those with the patience and the curiosity to unearth them. What remains now is the question: what really happened to the lifelines of an entire continent, and what secrets have they left behind? In the stillness of the Mediterranean islands, where time seems to have left behind a fragile trace of ancient civilizations, one group of crusaders looms large in the annals of history: the Knights Hospitaller. Known for their role in the Crusades and as a military order with vast influence, the Hospitallers once commanded great wealth, control, and power over lands and kingdoms. Their history, filled with conquests, alliances, and religious fervor, is well documented in many parts of Europe. But there is one strange mystery that continues to elude the history books: the disappearance of their records in certain regions, particularly in the eastern Mediterranean. Imagine walking through the crumbling stone walls of a fortress on the island of Rhodes, where the Hospitaller knights once stood guard, their armor glinting in the harsh sun, protecting their lands and interests. Today, the fortress is a shadow of its former self, but beneath the broken walls lies the lingering question: what happened to the records of the order, particularly in places like Palestine and parts of the Aegean? Why did such a powerful organization, one whose deeds were once chronicled in great detail, seem to have had so much of its documentation lost? The Knights Hospitaller, originally founded in Jerusalem in the late 11th century, were initially tasked with providing medical care to the poor and sick, especially pilgrims in the Holy Land. As time went on, however, their role shifted from healers to warriors, and the order became a formidable military force, with its members playing a central role in the Crusades. After the fall of Acre in 1291, the Hospitallers were forced to leave Palestine and resettle in various parts of the Mediterranean. First, they took refuge on the island of Cyprus, then later to Rhodes in 1309, and ultimately to Malta in 1530, where they would flourish once again. Yet, for all their might and influence, a startling gap emerges in the historical record during their time in the Holy Land and the Levant. Documents chronicling their activities, finances, and political dealings seem to have vanished from archives in the regions they once dominated. In Palestine, in particular, where the order had established commanderies, hospitals, and fortified castles, there are few surviving records, a mystery that historians have struggled to explain. Some have speculated that the fall of Acre, the last Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land in 1291, marked the beginning of this disappearance. As the Mamluks swept through the region, retaking Crusader territories, it is possible that many archives were deliberately destroyed, either by invading forces or by the knights themselves, in an attempt to protect sensitive information. The loss of such important historical documents would have been catastrophic for understanding the full scope of the Hospitallers' influence during this era. But not all explanations are so clear-cut. Some historians have suggested that the Knights Hospitaller, being a secretive military order, may have had their own reasons for deliberately hiding or concealing certain records. Were there documents that the knights themselves chose to erase or bury, perhaps to safeguard political secrets or protect the identities of individuals? Could there have been internal rivalries or power struggles within the order that led to the systematic removal of certain records? Another theory delves into the idea that the records were taken elsewhere, perhaps hidden in places that remain unknown to this day. Could the Knights Hospitaller, with their far-reaching connections, have relocated key documents to other strongholds, either in the West or in remote locations where they could be kept safe from prying eyes? Perhaps the disappearance of records was part of a larger effort to preserve their legacy, one that involved safeguarding their history away from the public eye. Even more intriguing are the theories that suggest a supernatural element to this mystery. The Knights Hospitaller were deeply connected to the Catholic Church, an institution known for its mystical elements and secretive rituals. Could it be that some records were lost because of an unseen force, a curse perhaps, or something more occult in nature that caused them to vanish from the face of the earth? As we reflect on the enigmatic absence of records, one must ask, what truly lies beneath the surface of the Knights Hospitaller's history? The question remains open, inviting further investigation. What hidden archives might still be buried, and what might they reveal about the inner workings of the order, its motives, and the mysterious events that led to the loss of so much crucial historical material? The answers may still be out there, waiting to be uncovered by those who dare to seek them. In the dim recesses of history, the mystery of the missing Knights Hospitaller records lingers, unresolved, prompting us to look deeper into the shadows of the past to uncover the secrets that might still be hidden there. As we continue our journey into the forgotten corners of history, we arrive at a strange and unsettling mystery: the sudden collapse of Crusader state archives during the final years of the Crusader presence in the Holy Land. Picture for a moment the stone citadels of Angkor, or the fortresses dotting the coastal lands of Palestine, towering over the ancient Mediterranean. The Crusader states, which had held sway over these lands for nearly 2 centuries, were home to a complex tapestry of records, official documents, administrative logs, and personal letters that chronicled a time of war, faith, and ambition. By the early 13th century, Crusader states like the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, and the County of Tripoli had woven an intricate web of governance, often keeping detailed accounts of their military campaigns, trade agreements, and ecclesiastical matters. These records, essential for understanding the Crusaders' expansion, military strategies, and diplomatic efforts, were housed in the bustling administrative centers of these cities. Yet, as the Crusader states began to collapse under pressure from the advancing Mamluks and the decline of Crusader power, something mysterious began to occur. The archives, once carefully maintained, began to disappear. The destruction of these archives is often linked to the fall of Acre in 1291, the last major Crusader stronghold in the Holy Land. As Mamluk forces stormed the city, defeating the Crusader remnants, it is widely believed that much of the precious documentation was either lost in the chaos of battle or deliberately destroyed in the aftermath. However, the mystery deepens when one examines the fate of the archives in other Crusader-held regions, where the collapse of these states was more gradual. In Antioch, for instance, long after the Crusader defenses had crumbled, there were sporadic efforts to preserve records, but many are missing from the historical timeline. Tripoli, which fell nearly a decade before Acre in 1289, similarly saw its archives vanish. Could it be that, even before the final collapse, the Crusaders themselves began to suppress certain documents, perhaps to avoid losing valuable secrets to the advancing Muslim forces? Were these documents removed, hidden, or destroyed for reasons other than mere military defeat? Historians have long pondered the possible explanations behind this sudden loss. Was it the result of direct military action? As the Mamluks conquered these states, they may have burned documents to wipe away any trace of Crusader rule. Yet, this doesn't fully account for the disappearance of archives in regions that had been lost to Crusader forces years earlier, such as Antioch and Tripoli. Were there internal causes at play as well? Perhaps political or religious shifts that led Crusaders to suppress or deliberately erase parts of their own history? Another intriguing theory points to economic collapse. As the Crusader states faltered, much of the infrastructure relied upon for record-keeping, the scribes, the buildings, the administrative systems, may have crumbled as well. Finance, often a driver of record-keeping in medieval societies, dwindled as trade routes were disrupted, and soldiers became more focused on survival than on documentation. If these records were no longer seen as important, could their destruction have been an unintentional consequence of the declining power of the Crusader states? However, there are those who argue that the vanishing of the archives may have been more strategic than accidental. Could it be that some of the Crusader elite, facing the inevitable end of their rule in the Holy Land, chose to erase certain documents, perhaps to protect the identities of individuals, religious secrets, or even political alliances that might have proven embarrassing or dangerous in the post-Crusader era? Such decisions could have been made quietly, without leaving a trace of their intentions. Some have gone so far as to suggest that the Crusader archives were deliberately hidden in remote locations, perhaps to be safeguarded for future generations or as a symbol of defiance against the loss of Christian power in the region. Could these missing records be buried in forgotten places, waiting to be uncovered by those willing to look for them? And if so, what secrets might they reveal? As we stand before the silent ruins of Crusader fortresses and imagine the loss of such vital records, one cannot help but wonder, what remains hidden in the dust of those vanished archives? What truths have been lost forever, and what might still be waiting to emerge from the forgotten corners of history? This mystery, much like the vanished Crusader states themselves, may remain shrouded in secrecy, inviting further investigation for generations to come. As we transition deeper into the shadows of history, we encounter a mystery that has long lingered beneath the surface: the fate of pre-Columbian Atlantic crossing attempts. For centuries, it was believed that the Atlantic Ocean, with its vast, unpredictable waters, was an insurmountable barrier between the Old World and the Americas, a division so immense that the first documented crossing by Christopher Columbus in 1492 was considered a monumental achievement. But was it truly the first? Could there have been undocumented voyages, lost to time, that crossed the ocean long before the age of exploration? To understand this mystery, let us first imagine the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Stretching between Europe, Africa, and the Americas, it is a body of water that, while daunting to modern sailors, was not entirely beyond the grasp of ancient seafarers. The ocean itself, with its unpredictable storms and shifting tides, would have been a formidable force in the lives of those attempting to navigate its breadth. And yet, scattered across the historical and archaeological record, are whispers of journeys that may have preceded the famous voyages of the 15th century. Consider the Viking expeditions. It is well established that, by the early 11th century, Norsemen had crossed the North Atlantic, establishing colonies on the shores of Greenland and North America. The Vinland sagas, texts that describe Viking journeys to a distant land that could be the northeastern part of North America, suggest that these early explorers were not confined to the northern seas alone. But what of other, more mysterious crossings? Was it possible that earlier, even more ancient peoples might have crossed the Atlantic without leaving the same lasting records? One theory suggests that the Carthaginians, a powerful maritime civilization from North Africa, might have made the first transatlantic voyage. According to some accounts, the Carthaginians, known for their seafaring expertise and their naval dominance, could have used their advanced navigation skills to explore the western reaches of the Atlantic. In fact, Hanno the Navigator, a Carthaginian explorer, is said to have sailed down the west coast of Africa and possibly beyond. But what if he, or others like him, ventured further west, across the Atlantic, long before Columbus? As we delve into these speculative waters, the evidence becomes more elusive. A peculiar, though fascinating, piece of evidence comes from the Portuguese. In the 15th century, they were pushing the boundaries of their explorations along the coast of Africa. Some historians speculate that before reaching the Americas, they may have made a series of secret voyages, their discoveries never recorded for reasons that remain unclear. Could these ships have crossed the Atlantic, leaving no trace in history? Perhaps they were intentionally erased, lost to the obscurity of time. Yet, what makes this mystery even more intriguing are the numerous legends from indigenous peoples across the Americas. These cultures, with their rich oral histories, speak of visitors from the East long before Columbus. Some stories describe bearded men, a detail that mirrors descriptions of the early Europeans, and advanced technologies, possibly from distant lands across the ocean. Could these be fragments of memories, passed down through generations, of real encounters with pre-Columbian Atlantic travelers? One theory, often discussed in fringe circles, posits that ancient Egyptian seafarers could have crossed the Atlantic, based on their advanced knowledge of navigation and their expansive trade networks. While this is highly speculative and remains unsupported by mainstream evidence, there are those who believe that the pyramids and other monumental structures scattered across the world may hold clues to a global connection that transcended the ancient civilizations of Egypt, Mesoamerica, and beyond. Equally puzzling is the absence of tangible proof. Why are there so few artifacts, no maps, no extensive records from these supposed Atlantic crossings? Theories vary. One suggestion is that early explorers, whether Vikings, Carthaginians, or others, may have made deliberate efforts to erase their records to protect valuable knowledge or to conceal their intentions from rival powers. Alternatively, the absence of records may simply reflect the limitations of the time, the absence of durable materials for documentation, and the transitory nature of early seafaring cultures. As we stand on the edge of this mystery, we are left with more questions than answers. Could the Atlantean voyages be nothing more than myth, or might they be the missing chapter in the story of human exploration? Did early civilizations possess the knowledge and capabilities to bridge the Atlantic divide, only to be lost in the tides of history? And if so, what secrets might lie beneath the ocean's surface, waiting to be discovered by those who dare to dive deeper? This remains one of history's most elusive and captivating puzzles, a riddle wrapped in ancient ocean waves, still as elusive as the waves themselves.